The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain, Chapter 13, Tom Stares at Ruin. When I reflect upon the number of disagreeable people who I know have gone to a better world, I am moved to lead a different life. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. October. This is one of the peculiarly dangerous months to speculate in stocks in. The others are July, January, September, April, November, May, March, June, December, August, and February. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. Thus mournfully communing with himself, Tom moped along the lane past Pudd'nhead Wilson's house, and still on and on between fences enclosing vacant country on each hand till he neared the haunted house. Then he came moping back again, with many sighs and heavy with trouble. He sorely wanted cheerful company. Rowena! His heart gave a bound at the thought, but the next thought quieted him. The detested twins would be there. He was on the inhabited side of Wilson's house, and now, as he approached it, he noticed that the sitting-room was lighted. This would do. Others made him feel unwelcome sometimes, but Wilson never failed in courtesy toward him, and a kindly courtesy does at least save one's feelings, even if it is not professing to stand for a welcome. Wilson heard footsteps at his threshold, then the clearing of a throat. "It's that fickle-tempered, dissipated young goose, poor devil. He find friends pretty scarce to-day, likely, after the disgrace of carrying a personal assault case into a law court." A dejected knock. "Come in." Tom entered and dropped into a chair without saying anything. Wilson said kindly, "Why, my boy, you look desolate. Don't take it so hard. Try and forget you have been kicked." "Oh, dear," said Tom, wretchedly. "It's not that, Pudd'nhead, it's not that. It's 1,000 times worse than that. Oh, yes, 1,000,000 times worse." "Why, Tom, what do you mean? Has Rowena—" "Flung me? No, but the old man has." Wilson said to himself, and thought of the mysterious girl in the bedroom. "The Driscolls have been making discoveries." Then he said aloud, gravely, "Tom, there are some kinds of dissipation which—" "Oh, shucks, this hasn't got anything to do with dissipation. He wanted me to challenge that derned Italian savage, and I wouldn't do it." "Yes, of course he would do that," said Wilson in a meditative, matter-of-course way. "But the thing that puzzled me was why he didn't look to that last night, for one thing, and why he let you carry such a matter into court of law at all, either before the duel or after it. It's no place for it. It was not like him. I couldn't understand it. How did it happen?" "It happened because I didn't know anything about it. He was asleep when I got home last night." "And you didn't wake him? Tom, is that possible?" Tom was not getting much comfort here. He fidgeted a moment, then said, "I didn't choose to tell him, that's all. He was going a-fishing before dawn with Pembroke Howard, and if I got the twins into the common calaboose, and I thought sure I could, I never dreamed of their slipping out on a paltry fine for such an outrageous offense. Well, once in the calaboose they would be disgraced, and Uncle wouldn't want any duels with that sort of characters, and wouldn't allow any." "Tom, I am ashamed of you. I don't see how you could treat your good old uncle so. I am a better friend of his than you are, for if I had known the circumstances I would have kept that case out of court until I got word to him and let him have the gentleman's chance." "You would?" exclaimed Tom, with lively surprise. "And it your first case, and you know perfectly well there never would have been any case if he had got that chance, don't you? And you'd have finished your days a pauper nobody instead of being an actually launched and recognized lawyer today? And you would really have done that, would you?" "Certainly." Tom looked at him a moment or two, then shook his head sorrowfully and said, "I believe you. Upon my word, I do. I don't know why I do, but I do. Pudd'nhead Wilson, I think you're the biggest fool I ever saw." "Thank you." "Don't mention it." "Well, he has been requiring you to fight the Italian, and you have refused, you degenerate remnant of an honorable line. I'm thoroughly ashamed of you, Tom." "Oh, that's nothing. I don't care for anything now that the will's torn up again." "Tom, Tell me squarely, didn't he find any fault with you for anything but those two things? Carrying the case into court and refusing to fight?" He watched the young fellow's face narrowly, but it was entirely reposeful, and so also was the voice that answered. "No, he didn't find any other fault with me. If he had had any to find, he would have begun yesterday, for he was just in the humor for it. He drove that Jack pair around town and showed them the sights, and when he came home he couldn't find his father's old silver watch that don't keep time and he thinks so much of, and couldn't remember what he did with it 3 or 4 days ago when he saw it last, and when I suggested that it probably wasn't lost but stolen, it put him in a regular passion, and he said I was a fool, which convinced me without any trouble that that was just what he was afraid had happened himself, but did not want to believe it, because lost things stand a better chance of being found again than stolen ones." Whistled Wilson. "Score another one to list." "Another what?" "Another theft." "Theft?" "Yes, theft. That watch isn't lost, it's stolen. There's been another raid on the town, and just the same old mysterious sort of thing that has happened once before, as you remember." "You don't mean it." "It's as sure as you are born. Have you missed anything yourself?" "No. That is, I did miss a silver pencil case that Aunt Mary Pratt gave me last birthday." "You'll find it stolen, that's what you'll find." "No, I shan't, for when I suggested theft about the watch and got such a rap, I went and examined my room, and the pencil case was missing, but it was only mislaid, and I found it again." "You are sure you missed nothing else?" "Well, nothing of consequence. I missed a small plain gold ring worth $2 or $3, but that will turn up. I'll look again." "In my opinion, you'll not find it. There's been a raid, I tell you." "Come in." Mr. Justice Robinson entered, followed by Blackstone and the town constable, Jim Blake. They sat down, and after some wandering and aimless weather conversation, Wilson said, "By the way, we've just added another to the list of thefts, maybe two. Judge Driscoll's old silver watch is gone, and Tom here has missed a gold ring." "Well, it is a sad business," said the justice, "and gets worse the further it goes. The Hankses, the Dobsons, the Pilligrews, the Ortons, the Grangers, the Hales, the Fullers, the Holcombs, in fact, everybody that lives around about Patsy Cooper's, has been robbed of little things like trinkets and teaspoons and such like small valuables that are easily carried off. It's perfectly plain that the thief took advantage of the reception at Patsy Cooper's when all the neighbors were in her house and all their niggers hanging around her fence for a look at the show, to raid the vacant houses undisturbed. Patsy is miserable about it, miserable on account of the neighbors, and particularly miserable on account of her foreigners, of course. So miserable on their account that she hasn't any room to worry about her own little losses." "It's the same old raider," said Wilson. "I suppose there isn't any doubt about that." "Constable Blake doesn't think so." "No, you're wrong there," said Blake. "The other times it was a man. There was plenty of signs of that, as we know in the profession, though we never got hands on him, but this time it's a woman." Wilson thought of the mysterious girl straight off. She was always in his mind now, but she failed him again. Blake continued, "She's a stoop-shouldered old woman with a covered basket on her arm, in a black veil, dressed in mourning. I saw her going aboard the ferry-boat yesterday. Lives in Illinois, I reckon, but I don't care where she lives. I'm going to get her. She can make herself sure of that." "What makes you think she's the thief?" "Well, there ain't any other, for one thing, and for another, some nigger drayman that happened to be driving along saw her coming out of or going into houses and told me so, and it just happens that they was robbed every time." It was granted that this was plenty good enough circumstantial evidence. A pensive silence followed, which lasted some moments. Then Wilson said, "There's one thing, anyway. She can't either pawn or sell Count Luigi's costly Indian dagger." "My!" Tom said. "Is that gone?" "Yes." "Well, that was a haul. But why can't she pawn it or sell it?" "Because when the twins went home from the Sons of Liberty meeting last night, news of the raid was sifting in from everywhere, and Aunt Patsy was in distress to know if they had lost anything. They found that the dagger was gone, and they notified the police and pawnbrokers everywhere. It was a great haul, yes, but the old woman won't get anything out of it, because she'll get caught." "Did they offer a reward?" asked Buckstone. "Yes, $500 for the knife, and 500 more for the thief." "What a leather-headed idea!" exclaimed the constable. "The thief doesn't go near them nor send anybody. Whoever goes is going to get himself nabbed, for there ain't any pawnbroker that's going to lose the chance to—" If anybody had noticed Tom's face at that time, the gray-green color of it might have provoked curiosity, but nobody did. He said to himself, "I'm gone. I never can square up. The rest of the plunder won't pawn or sell for half of the bill. Oh, I know it. I'm gone, I'm gone. And this time it's for good. Oh, this is awful. I don't know what to do, nor which way to turn." "Softly, softly," said Wilson to Blake. "I planned their scheme for them at midnight last night, and it was all finished up shipshape by 2 this morning. They'll get their dagger back, and then I'll explain to you how the thing was done." There were strong signs of a general curiosity, and Buckstone said, "Well, you have whetted us up pretty sharp, Wilson, and I'm free to say that if you don't mind telling us in confidence—" "Oh, I'd as soon tell as not, Buckstone, but as long as the twins and I agreed to say nothing about it, we must let it stand so. But you can take my word for it. You won't be kept waiting 3 days. Somebody will apply for that reward pretty promptly, and I'll show you the thief and the dagger both very soon afterward." The constable was disappointed and also perplexed. He said, "It may all be, yes, and I hope it will be, but I'm blamed if I can see my way through it. It's too many for yours truly." The subject seemed about talked out. Nobody seemed to have anything further to offer. After a silence, the justice of the peace informed Wilson that he and Buckstone and the constable had come as a committee, on the part of the Democratic party, to ask him to run for mayor, for the little town was about to become a city, and the first charter election was approaching. It was the first attention which Wilson had ever received at the hands of any party. It was a sufficiently humble one, but it was a recognition of his debut into the town's life and activities at last. It was a step upward, and he was deeply gratified. He accepted, and the committee departed, followed by young Tom. End of chapter 13. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain. Chapter 14. Roxana Insists Upon Reform. The true Southern watermelon is a boon apart, and not to be mentioned with commoner things. It is chief of this world's luxuries, king, by the grace of God, over all the fruits of the earth. When one has tasted it, he knows what the angels eat. It was not a Southern watermelon that Eve took. We know it because she repented. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. About the time that Wilson was bowing the committee out, Pembroke Howard was entering the next house to report. He found the old judge sitting grim and straight in his chair, waiting. "Well, Howard, the news?" "The best in the world." "Accepts, does he?" And the light of battle gleamed joyously in the judge's eye. "Accepts? Why, he jumped at it." "Did he? Did he? Now that's fine. That's very fine. I like that. When is it to be?" "Now. Straight off. Tonight. An admirable fellow, admirable." "Admirable? Why, he's a darling. Why, it's an honor as well as a pleasure to stand up before such a man. Come, off with you. Go and arrange everything, and give him my heartiest compliments. A rare fellow indeed, an admirable fellow, as you have said. I'll have him in the vacant stretch between Wilson's and the haunted house within the hour, and I'll bring my own pistols." Judge Driscoll began to walk the floor in a state of pleased excitement, but presently he stopped and began to think of Tom. Twice he moved toward the secretary, and twice he turned away again, and finally he said, "This may be my last night in the world. I must not take the chance. He is worthless and unworthy, but it is largely my fault. He was entrusted to me by my brother on his dying bed, and I have indulged him to his hurt, instead of training him up severely and making a man of him. I have violated my trust, and I must not add the sin of desertion to that. I have forgiven him once already, and would subject him to a long and hard trial before forgiving him again, if I could live. But I must not run that risk. No, I must restore the will. But if I survive the duel, I will hide it away, and he will not know, and I will not tell him until he reforms, and I see that his reformation is going to be permanent." He withdrew the will, and his ostensible nephew was heir to a fortune again. As he was finishing his task, Tom, wearied with another brooding tramp, entered the house and went tiptoeing past the sitting-room door. He glanced in and hurried on, for the sight of his uncle was nothing but terrors for him tonight. But his uncle was writing. That was unusual at this late hour. What could he be writing? A chill of anxiety settled down upon Tom's heart. Did that writing concern him? He was afraid so. He reflected that when ill luck begins, it does not come in sprinkles, but in showers. He said he would get a glimpse of that document or know the reason why. He heard someone coming and stepped out of sight and hearing. It was Pembroke Howard. What could be hatching? Howard said with great satisfaction, "Everything's right and ready. He's gone to the battleground with his second, and the surgeon, also with his brother. I've arranged it all with Wilson. Wilson's his second. We are to have 3 shots apiece." "Good. How is the moon?" "Bright as day, nearly. Perfect for the distance, 50 yards. No wind, not a breath. Hot and still." "All good, all first-rate. Here, Pembroke, read this and witness it." Pembroke read and witnessed the will, then gave the old man's hand a hearty shake, and said, "Now, that's right, York, but I knew you would do it. You couldn't leave that poor chap to fight along without means or profession, with certain defeat before him, and I knew you wouldn't, for his father's sake, if not for his own." "For his dead father's sake I couldn't, I know, for poor Percy. But you know what Percy was to me. But mind, Tom is not to know of this unless I fall tonight." "I understand. I'll keep the secret." The judge put the will away, and the two started for the battleground. In another minute the will was in Tom's hands. His misery vanished. His feelings underwent a tremendous revulsion. He put the will carefully back in its place, and spread his mouth and swung his hat once, twice, 3 times around his head, in imitation of 3 rousing huzzas, no sound issuing from his lips. He fell to communing with himself excitedly and joyously, but every now and then he let off another volley of dumb hurrahs. He said to himself, "I've got the fortune again, but I'll not let on that I know about it. And this time I'm going to hang on to it. I take no more risks. I'll gamble no more. I'll drink no more. Because I'll not go where there is any part of that sort of thing going on again. It's the sure way, the only sure way. I might have thought of that sooner. Well, yes, if I had wanted to. But now, dear me, I've had a scare this time, and I'll take no more chances, not a single chance more. Land, I persuaded myself this evening that I could fetch him around without any great amount of effort, but I've been getting more and more heavy-hearted and doubtful straight along ever since. If he tells me about this thing, all right, but if he doesn't, I shan't let on. I'd like to tell Pudd'nhead Wilson, but no, I'll think about that. Perhaps I won't." He whirled off another dead huzzah and said, "I'm reformed, and this time I'll stay so, sure." He was about to close with a final grand silent demonstration when he suddenly recollected that Wilson had put it out of his power to pawn or sell the Indian knife, and that he was once more in awful peril of exposure by his creditors for that reason. His joy collapsed utterly, and he turned away and moped toward the door, moaning and lamenting over the bitterness of his luck. He dragged himself upstairs and brooded in his room a long time, disconsolate and forlorn, with Luigi's Indian knife for a text. At last he sighed and said, "When I supposed these stones were glass and this ivory bone, the thing hadn't any interest for me because it hadn't any value and couldn't help me out of my trouble. But now, why, now it is full of interest. Yes, and of a sort to break a body's heart. It's a bag of gold that has turned to dirt and ashes in my hands. It could save me, and save me so easily, and yet I've got to go to ruin. It's like drowning with a life-preserver in my reach. All the hard luck comes to me, and all the good luck goes to other people. Pudd'nhead Wilson, for instance. Even his career has got a sort of a little start at last. And what has he done to deserve it, I should like to know? Yes, he has opened his own road, but he isn't content with that, but must block mine. It's a sordid, selfish world, and I wish I was out of it. He allowed the light of the candle to play upon the jewels of the sheath, but the flashings and sparklings had no charm for his eye. They were only just so many pangs to his heart. "I must not say anything to Roxy about this thing," he said. "She is too daring. She would be for digging these stones out and selling them, and then, why, she would be arrested and the stones traced, and then—" The thought made him quake, and he hid the knife away, trembling all over and glancing furtively about, like a criminal who fancies that the accuser is already at hand. Should he try to sleep? Oh, no, sleep was not for him. His trouble was too haunting, too afflicting for that. He must have somebody to mourn with. He would carry his despair to Roxy. He had heard the several distant gunshots, but that sort of thing was not uncommon, and they had made no impression upon him. He went out at the back door and turned westward. He passed Wilson's house and proceeded along the lane, and presently saw several figures approaching Wilson's place through the vacant lots. These were the duelists returning from the fight. He thought he recognized them, but as he had no desire for white people's company, he stooped down behind the fence until they were out of his way. Roxy was feeling fine. She said, "Why was you, child? Warn't you in it?" "In what?" "In the duel." "Duel? Has there been a duel?" "'Course they has. The old judge has been having a duel with one of them twins." "Great Scott!" Then he added to himself, "That's what made him remake the will. He thought he might get killed, and he softened him toward me. And that's what he and Howard were so busy about. Oh, dear, if the twin had only killed him, I should be out of my—" "What is you mumbling about, Chambers? Where was you? Didn't you know they was going to be a duel?" "No, I didn't. The old man tried to get me to fight one with Count Luigi, but he didn't succeed, so I reckon he concluded to patch up the family honor himself." He laughed at the idea and went rambling on with a detailed account of his talk with the judge, and how shocked and ashamed the judge was to find that he had a coward in his family. He glanced up at last and got a shock himself. Roxana's bosom was heaving with suppressed passion, and she was glowering down upon him with measureless contempt written in her face. "And you refused to fight a man that kicked you, 'stead of jumping at the chance? And you ain't got no more feeling than to come and tell me that fetched such a poor low-down ordinary rabbit into the world? Pa, it makes me sick. It's the nigger in you, that's what it is. 31 parts of you is white, and only 1 part nigger, and that poor little 1 part is your soul. 'Tain't worth saving. 'Tain't worth toting on a shovel and throwing in the gutter. You has disgraced your birth. What would your pa think of you? It's enough to make him turn in his grave." The last 3 sentences stung Tom into a fury, and he said to himself that if his father were only alive and in reach of assassination, his mother would soon find that he had a very clear notion of the size of his indebtedness to that man, and was willing to pay it up in full, and would do it, too, even at risk of his life. But he kept this thought to himself. That was safest in his mother's present state. "Whatever has come of your Essex blood? That's what I can't understand. And it ain't only just Essex blood that's in you, not by a long sight, 'deed it ain't. My great-great-great-grandfather and your great-great-great-great-grandfather was old Captain John Smith, the highest blood that old Virginia ever turned out, and his great-great-grandmother, or summers along back there, was Pocahontas the Injun Queen, and her husband was a nigger king out in Africa. And yet there you is, a-slinking out in a duel and disgracing our whole line like an ordinary low-down hound. Yes, it's the nigger in you." She sat down on her candle-box and fell into a reverie. Tom did not disturb her. He sometimes lacked prudence, but it was not in circumstances of this kind. Roxana's storm went gradually down, but it died hard, and even when it seemed to be quite gone, it would now and then break out in a distant rumble, so to speak, in the form of muttered ejaculations. One of these was, "Ain't nigger enough in him to show in his fingernails, and that takes mighty little, yet dey's enough to paint his soul." Presently she muttered, "Yes, sir, enough to paint a whole thimbleful of them." At last her ramblings ceased altogether, and her countenance began to clear, a welcome sight to Tom, who had learned her moods, and knew she was on the threshold of good humor now. He noticed that from time to time she unconsciously carried her finger to the end of her nose. He looked closer and said, "Why, mammy, the end of your nose is skinned. How did that come?" She sent out the sort of whole-hearted peal of laughter which God has vouchsafed in its perfection to none but the happy angels in heaven and the bruised and broken black slave on earth, and said, "Dad, fetch that duel. I've been in it myself." "Gracious, did a bullet do that?" "Yes, sir, you bet it did." "Well, I declare. Why, how did that happen?" "Happened this way. I was a-settin' here kind of dozing in the dark, and ch-bang goes a gun right out there. I skips along out towards t'other side of the house to see what's going on, and stops by the old winder on the side towards Pudd'nhead Wilson's house that ain't got no sash in it, but they ain't none of 'em got any sashes for that's concerned. And I stood there in the dark and look out, and there in the moonlight, right down under me, is one of the twins a-cussin', not much, but just cussin' soft. It is the brown one that is cussin', 'cause he is hit in the shoulder. And Dr. Claypool, he is a-workin' at him, and Pudd'nhead Wilson, he's a-helpin', and old Judge Driscoll and Pem Howard is a-standin' out yonder a little piece waitin' for him to get ready again. And treckly dey squared off and give the word, and bang, bang went the pistols, and the twin he say, 'Ouch!' hit him on the hand this time, and I hear that same bullet go spat agin the logs under the winder, and the next time they shoot, the twin say, 'Ouch!' again, and I done it too, 'cause the bullet glance on his cheekbone and skip up here and glance on the side of the winder and whiz right across my face and tuck the hide off my nose. Why, if I'd been just an inch or an inch and a half further, 'twould have tucked the whole nose and disfigured me. Here's the bullet. I hunted her up." "Did you stand there all the time?" "That's a question to ask, ain't it? What else would I do? Does I get a chance to see a duel every day?" "Why, you were right in range. Weren't you afraid?" The woman gave a sniff of scorn. "'Fraid? The Smith Pocahontases ain't 'fraid of nothing, let alone bullets." "They've got pluck enough, I suppose. What they lack is judgment. I wouldn't have stood there." "Nobody's accusing you." "Did anybody else get hurt?" "Yes, we all got hit 'cept the blond twin and the doctor and the seconds. The judge didn't get hurt, but I hear Pudd'nhead say the bullet snipped some of his hair off." "George," said Tom to himself, "to come so near being out of my trouble and miss it by an inch. Oh, dear, dear, he will live to find me out and sell me to some nigger trader yet. Yes, and he would do it in a minute." Then he said aloud in a grave tone, "Mother, we are in an awful fix." Roxana caught her breath with a spasm and said, "Child, what you hit a body so sudden for like that? What's been going to happen?" "Well, there's one thing I didn't tell you. When I wouldn't fight, he tore up the will again, and—" Roxana's face turned a dead white, and she said, "Now you's done forever. That's the end. Both of us is going to starve to—" "No, wait, and hear me through, can't you? I reckon that when he resolved to fight himself, he thought he might get killed and not have a chance to forgive me any more in this life. So he made the will again, and I've seen it, and it's all right. But—" "Oh, thank goodness! Then we safe again. Safe! And so what did you want to come here and talk such dreadful—" "Hold on, I tell you, and let me finish. The swag I gathered won't half square me up, and the first thing we know, my creditors—well, you know what'll happen." Roxana dropped her chin and told her son to leave her alone. She must think this matter out. Presently she said impressively, "You got to go mighty keerful now, I tell you, and here's what you got to do. He didn't get killed, and if you gives him the least reason he'll bust the will agin, and that's the last time, now hear me. So You's got to show him what you can do in the next few days. You got to be pison good and let him see it. You got to do everything that'll make him believe in you, and you got to sweeten around old Aunt Pratt, too. She's powerful strong with the Judge, and the best friend you got. Next, you go a long way to St. Louis, and that'll keep him in your favor. And then you go and make a bargain with them people. You tell him he ain't going to live long, and that's the fact, too. And tell him you'll pay him interest, and big interest, too. 10 per, what you call it? 10% a month? That's it. Then you take and sell your truck round, and a little at a time, and pay the interest. How long will it last? I think there's enough to pay the interest 5 or 6 months. Then you's all right. If he don't die in 6 months, that don't make no difference. Providence'll provide. You's gwine to be safe if you behaves. She bent an austere eye on him and added, And you is gwine to behave. Does you know that? He laughed and said he was going to try anyway. She did not unbend. She said gravely, Tryin' ain't the thing. You's gwine to do it. You ain't gwine to steal a pin, 'cause it ain't safe no more. And you ain't gwine into no bad company, not even once, you understand? And you ain't gwine to drink a drop, nary a single drop. And you ain't gwine to gamble one single gamble, not one. And this ain't what you's gwine to try to do. It's what you's gwine to do. And I'll tell you how I knows it. This is how. I's gwine to follow along to St. Louis my own self, and you's gwine to come to me every day of your life, and I'll look you over. And if you fails in one single one them things, just one, I take my oath I'll come straight down to this town and tell the Judge you's a nigger and a slave, and prove it. She paused to let her words sink home. Then she added, Chambers, does you believe me when I says that? Tom was sober enough now. There was no levity in his voice when he answered, Yes, Mother, I know now that I am reformed, and permanently, and beyond the reach of any human temptation. Then g'long home and begin. End of chapter 14. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain, Chapter 15, The Robber Robbed. Nothing so needs reforming as other people's habits. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. Behold, the fool saith, Put not all thine eggs in the one basket, which is but a manner of saying, Scatter your money and your attention. But the wise man saith, Put all your eggs in the one basket, and watch that basket. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. What a time of it Dawson's Landing was having! All its life it had been asleep, but now it hardly got a chance for a nod, so swiftly did big events and crashing surprises come along in one another's wake. Friday morning, first glimpse of real nobility, also grand reception at Aunt Patsy Cooper's, also great robber raid. Friday evening, dramatic kicking of the ear of the chief citizen in presence of 400 people. Saturday morning, emergence as practicing lawyer of the long-submerged Pudd'nhead Wilson. Saturday night, duel between chief citizen and titled stranger. The people took more pride in the duel than in all the other events put together, perhaps. It was a glory to their town to have such a thing happen there. In their eyes, the principals had reached the summit of human honor. Everybody paid homage to their names. Their praises were in all mouths. Even the duelist's subordinates came in for a handsome share of the public approbation, wherefore Pudd'nhead Wilson was suddenly become a man of consequence. When asked to run for the mayoralty Saturday night, he was risking defeat, but Sunday morning found him a made man and his success assured. The twins were prodigiously great now. The town took them to its bosom with enthusiasm. Day after day and night after night they went dining and visiting from house to house, making friends, enlarging and solidifying their popularity, and charming and surprising all with their musical prodigies, and now and then heightening the effects with samples of what they could do in other directions, out of their stock of rare and curious accomplishments. They were so pleased that they gave the regulation 30 days' notice, the required preparation for citizenship, and resolved to finish their days in this pleasant place. That was the climax. The delighted community rose as one man and applauded, and when the twins were asked to stand for seats in the forthcoming aldermanic board, and consented, the public contentment was rounded and complete. Tom Driscoll was not happy over these things. They sunk deep and hurt all the way down. He hated the one twin for kicking him, and the other one for being the kicker's brother. Now and then the people wondered why nothing was heard of the raider, or of the stolen knife, or the other plunder, but nobody was able to throw any light on that matter. Nearly a week had drifted by, and still the thing remained a vexed mystery. On Sunday, Constable Blake and Pudd'nhead Wilson met on the street, and Tom Driscoll joined them in time to open their conversation for them. He said to Blake, "You are not looking well, Blake. You seem to be annoyed about something. Has anything gone wrong in the detective business? I believe you fairly and justifiably claim to have a pretty good reputation in that line, isn't it so?" Which made Blake feel good and look it, but Tom added, "For a country detective," which made Blake feel the other way, and not only look it, but betray it in his voice. "Yes, sir, I have got a reputation, and it's as good as anybody's in the profession, too, country or no country." "Oh, I beg your pardon. I didn't mean any offense. What I started out to ask was only about the old woman that raided the town. The stoop-shouldered old woman, you know, that you said you were going to catch. And I knew you would, too, because you have the reputation of never boasting, and, well, you've caught the old woman?" "Damn the old woman." "Why, sure, you don't mean to say you haven't caught her?" "No, I haven't caught her. If anybody could have caught her, I could, but nobody couldn't, and I don't care who he is." "Oh, I am sorry, real sorry, for your sake, because when it gets around that a detective has expressed himself confidently and then—" "Don't you worry, that's all. Don't you worry. And as for the town needn't worry either. She's my meat. Make yourself easy about that. I'm on her track. I've got clues. That's good. Now, if you could get an old veteran detective down from St. Louis to help you find out what the clues mean and where they lead to, and then—" "I'm plenty veteran enough myself, and I don't need anybody's help. I'll have her inside of a month. Now, that I'll swear to." Tom said carelessly, "I suppose that will answer. Yes, that will answer. But I reckon she is pretty old, and old people don't often outlive the cautious pace of the professional detective when he has got his clues together and is out on his still hunt." Blake's dull face flushed under this jibe, but before he could set his retort in order, Tom had turned to Wilson and was saying with placid indifference of manner and voice, "Who got the reward, Pudd'nhead?" Wilson winced slightly and saw that his own turn was come. What reward?" "Why, the reward for the thief, and the other one for the knife." Wilson answered, and rather uncomfortably, to judge by his hesitating fashion of delivering himself, "Well, in face, nobody has claimed it yet." Tom seemed surprised. "Why, is that so?" Wilson showed a trifle of irritation when he replied, "Yes, it's so, and what of it?" "Oh, nothing. Only I thought you had struck out a new idea, and invented a scheme that was going to revolutionize the time-worn and ineffectual methods of the—" He stopped and turned to Blake, who was happy now that another had taken his place on the gridiron. "Blake, didn't you understand him to intimate that it wouldn't be necessary for you to hunt the old woman down?" "But, George, he said he'd have the thief and the swag both inside of 3 days. He did, by hokey, and that's just about a week ago. Why, I said at the time that no thief and no thief's pal was going to try to pawn or sell a thing where he knowed the pawnbroker could get both rewards by taking him into camp with the swag. It was the blessedest idea that I ever struck." "Well, you'd change your mind," said Wilson, with irritated bluntness, "if you knew the entire scheme instead of only part of it." "Well," said the constable, pensively, "I had the idea that it wouldn't work, and up to now I'm right, anyway." "Very well, then, let it stand at that, and give it a further show. It has worked at least as well as your own methods, you perceive." The constable hadn't anything handy to hit back with, so he discharged a discontented sniff and said nothing. After the night that Wilson had partly revealed his scheme at his house, Tom had tried for several days to guess out the secret of the rest of it, but had failed. Then it occurred to him to give Roxana Smarterhead a chance at it. He made up a superstitious case and laid it before her. She thought it over and delivered her verdict upon it. Tom said to himself, "She's hit it, sure." He thought he would test that verdict now and watch Wilson's face, so he said reflectively, "Wilson, you're not a fool, a fact of recent discovery. Whatever your scheme was, it had sense in it, Blake's opinion to the contrary notwithstanding. I don't ask you to reveal it, but I will suppose a case which you will answer as a starting point for the real thing I am going to come at, and that's all I want. You offered $500 for the knife and $500 for the thief. We will suppose, for argument's sake, that the first reward is advertised and the second offered by private letter to pawnbrokers, and—" Blake slapped his thigh and cried out, "By Jackson, he's got you, Pudd'nhead! Now why couldn't I or any fool have thought of that?" Wilson said to himself, "Anybody with a reasonably good head would have thought of it. I'm not surprised that Blake didn't detect it. I am only surprised that Tom did. There is more to him than I supposed." He said nothing aloud, and Tom went on, "Very well. The thief would not suspect that there was a trap, and he would bring or send the knife and say he bought it for a song or found it in the road or something like that, and try to collect the reward and be arrested, wouldn't he?" "Yes," said Wilson. "I think so," said Tom. "There can't be any doubt about it. Have you ever seen that knife?" "No." "Has any friend of yours?" "Not that I know of." "Well, I begin to think I understand why your scheme failed." "What do you mean, Tom? What are you driving at?" asked Wilson, with a dawning sense of discomfort. "Why, that there isn't any such knife." "Now look here, Wilson," said Blake. "Tom Driscoll's right, for $1,000 if I had it." Wilson's blood warmed a little, and he wondered if he had been played upon by those strangers. It certainly had something of that look. But what could they gain by it? He threw out that suggestion. Tom replied, "Gain? Oh, nothing that you would value, maybe. But they are strangers making their way in a new community. Is it nothing to them to appear as pets of an Oriental prince at no expense? Is it nothing to them to be able to dazzle this poor town with $1,000 rewards at no expense? Wilson, there isn't any such knife, or your scheme would have fetched it to light. Or, if there is any such knife, they've got it yet. I believe, myself, that they've seen such a knife, for Angelo pictured it out with his pencil too swiftly and handily for him to have been inventing it, and of course I can't swear that they've never had it, but this I'll go bail for. If they had it when they came to this town, they've got it yet." Blake said, "Looks mighty reasonable, the way Tom puts it. It most certainly does." Tom responded, turning to leave, "You find the old woman, Blake, and if she can't furnish the knife, go and search the twins." Tom sauntered away. Wilson felt a good deal depressed. He hardly knew what to think. He was loath to withdraw his faith from the twins, and was resolved not to do it on the present indecisive evidence. But, well, he would think, and then decide how to act. "Blake, what do you think of this matter?" "Well, Pudd'nhead, I'm bound to say I put it up the way Tom does. They hadn't the knife, or if they had it, they've got it yet." The men parted. Wilson said to himself, "I believe they had it. If it had been stolen, the scheme would have restored it. That is certain. And so I believe they've got it." Tom had no purpose in his mind when he encountered those two men. When he began his talk, he hoped to be able to gall them a little and get a trifle of malicious entertainment out of it. But when he left in great spirits, for he perceived that just by pure luck and no troublesome labor he had accomplished several delightful things. He had touched both men on a raw spot and seen them squirm. He had modified Wilson's sweetness for the twins with one small bitter taste that he wouldn't be able to get out of his mouth right away. And, best of all, he had taken the hated twins down a peg in the community, for Blake would gossip around freely, after the manner of detectives, and within a week the town would be laughing at them in its sleeve for offering a gaudy reward for a bauble which they either never possessed or hadn't lost. Tom was very well satisfied with himself. Tom's behavior at home had been perfect during the entire week. His uncle and aunt had seen nothing like it before. They could find no fault with him anywhere. Saturday evening he said to the judge, "I've had something preying on my mind, uncle, and as I am going away, and might never see you again, I can't bear it any longer. I made you believe I was afraid to fight that Italian adventurer. I had to get out of it on some pretext or other, and maybe I chose badly, being taken unawares. But no honorable person could consent to meet him in the field, knowing what I knew about him." "Indeed? What was that?" "Count Luigi is a confessed assassin." "Incredible!" "It's perfectly true. Wilson detected it in his hand by palmistry, and charged him with it, and cornered him up so close that he had to confess. But both twins begged us on their knees to keep the secret, and swore they would lead straight lives here, and it was all so pitiful that we gave our word of honor never to expose them while they kept the promise. You would have done it yourself, uncle." "You're right, my boy, I would. A man's secret is still his own property, and sacred, when it has been surprised out of him like that. You did well, and I am proud of you." Then he added mournfully, "But I wish I could have been saved the shame of meeting an assassin on the field of honor." "It couldn't be helped, uncle. If I had known you were going to challenge him, I should have felt obliged to sacrifice my pledged word in order to stop it, but Wilson couldn't be expected to do otherwise than keep silent." "Oh, no, Wilson did right, and is in no way to blame. Tom, you have lifted a heavy load from my heart. I was stung to the very soul when I seemed to have discovered that I had a coward in my family." "You may imagine what it cost me to assume such a part, uncle." "Oh, I know it, poor boy, I know it. And I can't understand how much it has cost you to remain under that unjust stigma to this time. But it is all right now, and no harm is done. You have restored my comfort of mind, and with it your own, and both of us had suffered enough." The old man sat awhile, plunged in thought. Then he looked up with a satisfied light in his eye, and said, "That this assassin should have put the affront upon me of letting me meet him on the field of honor as if he were a gentleman is a matter which I will presently settle, but not now. I will not shoot him until after election. I see a way to ruin them both before. I will attend to that first. Neither of them shall be elected, that I promise. You are sure that the fact that he is an assassin has not got abroad?" "Perfectly certain of it, sir." "It will be a good card. I will fling a hint at it from the stump on the polling day. It will sweep the ground from under both of them." "There's not a doubt of it. It will finish them." "That and outside work among the voters will, to a certainty. I want you to come down here by and by and work privately among the ragtag and bobtail. You shall spend money among them. I will furnish it." Another point scored against the detested twins. Really, it was a great day for Tom. He was encouraged to chance a parting shot now at the same target, and did it. "You know that wonderful Indian knife that the twins have been making such a to-do about? Well, there's no track or trace of it yet, so the town is beginning to sneer and gossip and laugh. Half the people believe they never had any such knife, the other half believe they had it and have got it still. I've heard 20 people talking like that today." Yes, Tom's blemishless week had restored him to the favor of his aunt and uncle. His mother was satisfied with him, too. Privately, she believed she was coming to love him, but she did not say so. She told him to go along to St. Louis now, and she would get ready and follow. Then she smashed her whiskey bottle and said, "Dar now, I's a-gwine to make you walk as straight as a string, Chambers, and so I's brown. Now, you ain't gwine to get no bad example out of yo' mammy. I tole you couldn't go into no bad company. Well, you's gwine into my company, and I's gwine to fill de bill. Now den, trot along, trot along." Tom went aboard one of the big transient boats that night, with his heavy satchel of miscellaneous plunder, and slept the sleep of the unjust, which is serener and sounder than the other kind, as we know by the hanging eve history of 1,000,000 rascals. But when he got up in the morning, luck was against him again. A brother thief had robbed him while he slept, and gone ashore at some intermediate landing. End of chapter 15. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain. Chapter 16, Sold Down the River. If you pick up a starving dog and make him prosperous, he will not bite you. This is the principal difference between a dog and a man. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. We all know about the habits of the ant. We know all about the habits of the bee. But we know nothing at all about the habits of the oyster. It seems almost certain that we have been choosing the wrong time for studying the oyster. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. When Roxana arrived, she found her son in such despair and misery that her heart was touched and her motherhood rose up strong in her. He was ruined past hope now. His destruction would be immediate and sure, and he would be an outcast and friendless. That was reason enough for a mother to love a child. So she loved him and told him so. It made him wince secretly, for she was a nigger. That he was one himself was far from reconciling him to that despised race. Roxana poured out endearments upon him, to which he responded uncomfortably, but as well as he could, and she tried to comfort him, but that was not possible. These intimacies quickly became horrible to him, and within the hour he began to try to get up courage enough to tell her so, and require that they be discontinued or very considerably modified. But he was afraid of her. And besides, there came a lull now, for she had begun to think. She was trying to invent a saving plan. Finally she started up and said she had found a way out. Tom was almost suffocated by the joy of this sudden good news. Roxana said, "Here's the plan, and she'll win sure. I's a nigger, and nobody ain't going to doubt it that hears me talk. I's worth $600. Take and sell me and pay off these gamblers." Tom was dazed. He was not sure he had heard right. He was dumb for a moment. Then he said, "Do you mean that you would be sold into slavery to save me?" "Ain't you my child? And does you know anything that a mother won't do for her child? They ain't nothing a white mother won't do for her child. Who made 'em so? The Lord done it. And who made the niggers? The Lord made 'em. In the inside, mothers is all the same. The good Lord, he made 'em so. I's gwine to be sold into slavery, and in a year you's gwine to buy your mammy free again. I'll show you how. That's the plan." Tom's hopes began to rise, and his spirits along with them. He said, "It's lovely of you, Mammy. It's just—" "Say it again, and keep on saying it. It's all the pay a body can want in this world, and it's more than enough. Laws bless you, honey, when I's a slavin' around and dey busses me, if I knows you's a sayin' dat way off yonder summers, it'll heal up all the sore places, and I can stand 'em." "I do say it again, Mammy, and I'll keep on saying it, too. But how am I going to sell you? You're free, you know." "Much different dat make. White folks ain't particular. The law can sell me now if they tell me to leave the state in 6 months and I don't go. You draw up a paper, bill of sale, and put it way off yonder down in the middle of Kaintuck summers, and sign some names to it, and say you'll sell me cheap 'cause you's hard up. You'll find you ain't gwine to have no trouble. You take me up the country a piece and sell me on a farm. Them people ain't gwine to ask no questions if I's a bargain." Tom forged a bill of sale and sold his mother to an Arkansas cotton planter for a trifle over $600. He did not want to commit this treachery, but luck threw the man in his way, and this saved him the necessity of going up country to hunt up a purchaser, with the added risk of having to answer a lot of questions, whereas this planter was so pleased with Roxy that he asked next to none at all. Besides, the planter insisted that Roxy wouldn't know where she was at first, and that by the time she found out she would already have been contented. So Tom argued with himself that it was an immense advantage for Roxy to have a master who was pleased with her, as this planter manifestly was. In almost no time his flowing reasonings carried him to the point of even half believing he was doing Roxy a splendid surreptitious service in selling her down the river. And then he kept diligently saying to himself all the time, "It's for only a year. In a year I buy her free again. She'll keep that in mind, and it'll reconcile her." Yes, the little deception could do no harm, and everything would come out right and pleasant in the end, anyway. By agreement, the conversation in Roxy's presence was all about the man's up-country farm, and how pleasant a place it was, and how happy the slaves were there. So poor Roxy was entirely deceived, and easily, for she was not dreaming that her own son could be guilty of treason to a mother who, involuntarily going into slavery of any kind, mild or severe, or of any duration, brief or long, was making a sacrifice for him compared with which death would have been a poor and commonplace one. She lavished tears and loving caresses upon him privately, and then went away with her owner, went away broken-hearted, and yet proud to do it. Tom scored his accounts and resolved to keep to the very letter of his reform, and never to put that will in jeopardy again. He had $300 left. According to his mother's plan, he was to put that safely away and add her half of his pension to it monthly. In 1 year this fund would buy her free again. For a whole week he was not able to sleep well, so much the villainy which he had played upon his trusting mother preyed upon his rag of conscience. But after that he began to get comfortable again, and was presently able to sleep like any other miscreant. The boat bore Roxy away from St. Louis at 4 in the afternoon, and she stood on the lower guard abaft the paddle-box and watched Tom through a blur of tears until he melted into the throng of people and disappeared. Then she looked no more, but sat there on a coil of cable crying till far into the night. When she went to her foul steerage bunk at last, between the clashing engines, it was not to sleep, but only to wait for the morning, and, waiting, grieve. It had been imagined that she would not know, and would think she was traveling upstream. Why, she had been steamboating for years. At dawn she got up and went listlessly and sat down on the cable coil again. She passed many a snag whose break could have told her a thing to break her heart, for it showed a current moving in the same direction that the boat was going. But her thoughts were elsewhere, and she did not notice. But at last the roar of a bigger and nearer break than usual brought her out of her torpor, and she looked up, and her practised eye fell upon that tell-tale rush of water. For one moment her petrified gaze fixed itself there. Then her head dropped upon her breast, and she said, "Oh, the good Lord God have mercy on poor sinful me! I's sold down the river!" End of chapter 16. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain, Chapter 17. The Judge Utters Dire Prophecy. Even popularity can be overdone. In Rome, along at first, you are full of regrets that Michelangelo died, but by and by you only regret that you didn't see him do it. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. July 4. Statistics show that we lose more fools on this day than in all the other days of the year put together. This proves, by the number left in stock, that 1/4 of July per year is now inadequate. The country has grown so. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. The summer weeks dragged by, and then the political campaign opened in pretty warm fashion, and waxed hotter and hotter daily. The twins threw themselves into it with their whole heart, for their self-love was engaged. Their popularity, so general at first, had suffered afterward, mainly because they had been too popular, and so a natural reaction had followed. Besides, it had been diligently whispered around that it was curious, indeed very curious, that that wonderful knife of theirs did not turn up, if it was so valuable, or if it had ever existed. And with the whisperings went chucklings and nudgings and winks, and such things have an effect. The twins considered that success in the election would reinstate them, and that defeat would work them irreparable damage. Therefore they worked hard, but not harder than Judge Driscoll and Tom worked against them in the closing days of the canvass. Tom's conduct had remained so letter-perfect during 2 whole months now, that his uncle not only trusted him with money with which to persuade voters, but trusted him to go and get it himself out of the safe in the private sitting-room. The closing speech of the campaign was made by Judge Driscoll, and he made it against both of the foreigners. It was disastrously effective. He poured out rivers of ridicule upon them, and forced the big mass meeting to laugh and applaud. He scoffed at them as adventurers, mountebanks, sideshow riffraff, dime museum freaks. He assailed their showy titles with measureless derision. He said they were back-alley barbers, disguised as nobilities, peanut peddlers, masquerading as gentlemen, organ-grinders, bereft of their brother monkey. At last he stopped and stood still. He waited until the place had become absolutely silent and expectant. Then he delivered his deadliest shot, delivered it with ice-cold seriousness and deliberation, with a significant emphasis upon the closing words. He said he believed that the reward offered for the lost knife was humbug and bunkum, and that its owner would know where to find it whenever he should have occasion to assassinate somebody. Then he stepped from the stand, leaving a startled and impressive hush behind him instead of the customary explosion of cheers and party cries. The strange remark flew far and wide over the town, and made an extraordinary sensation. Everybody was asking, what could he mean by that? And everybody went on asking that question, but in vain, for the judge only said he knew what he was talking about, and stopped there. Tom said he hadn't any idea what his uncle meant, and Wilson, whenever he was asked what he thought it meant, parried the question by asking the questioner what he thought it meant. Wilson was elected. The twins were defeated, crushed, in fact, and left forlorn and substantially friendless. Tom went back to St. Louis happy. Dawson's Landing had a week of repose now, and it needed it, but it was in an expectant state, for the air was full of rumors of a new duel. Judge Driscoll's election labors had prostrated him, but it was said that as soon as he was well enough to entertain a challenge, he would get one from Count Luigi. The brothers withdrew entirely from society and nursed their humiliation in privacy. They avoided the people and went out for exercise only late at night, when the streets were deserted. End of chapter 17. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain, Chapter 18. Roxana Commands. Gratitude and treachery are merely the two extremities of the same procession. You have seen all of it that is worth staying for when the band and the gaudy officials have gone by. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. Thanksgiving Day. Let us all give humble, hearty, and sincere thanks now, but the turkeys. In the island of Fiji they do not use turkeys, they use plumbers. It does not become you and me to sneer at Fiji. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. The Friday after the election was a rainy one in St. Louis. It rained all day long, and rained hard, apparently trying its best to wash that soot-blackened town white, but of course not succeeding. Toward midnight Tom Driscoll arrived at his lodgings from the theater in the heavy downpour, and closed his umbrella and let himself in. But when he would have shut the door, he found that there was another person entering, doubtless another lodger. This person closed the door and tramped upstairs behind Tom. Tom found his door in the dark and entered it, and turned up the gas. When he faced about, lightly whistling, he saw the back of a man. The man was closing and locking his door from him. His whistle faded out, and he felt uneasy. The man turned around, a wreck of shabby old clothes, sodden with rain and all adrip, and showed a black face under an old slouch hat. Tom was frightened. He tried to order the man out, but the words refused to come, and the other man got the start. He said in a low voice, "Keep still. I's your mother." Tom sunk in a heap on a chair and gasped out, "It was mean of me and base, I know it, but I meant it for the best. I did indeed. I can swear it." Roxana stood a while, looking mutely down on him while he writhed in shame and went on incoherently babbling self-accusations mixed with pitiful attempts at explanation and palliation of his crime. Then she seated herself and took off her hat, and her unkempt masses of long brown hair tumbled down about her shoulders. It weren't no fault of yourn that ain't gray," she said sadly, noticing the hair. "I know it, I know it. I'm a scoundrel, but I swear I meant it for the best. It was a mistake, of course, but I thought it was for the best. I truly did." Roxana began to cry softly, and presently words began to find their way out between her sobs. They were uttered lamentingly rather than angrily. "Sell a person down the river, for the best. I wouldn't treat a dog so. I is all broke down and wore out now, and so I reckon it ain't in me to storm round no more, like I used to when I was trampled and abused. I don't know, but maybe it's so. Leastwise, I suffered so much that mourning seemed to come more handy to me now than storming." These words should have touched Tom Driscoll, but if they did, that effect was obliterated by a stronger one which removed the heavy weight of fear which lay upon him, and gave his crushed spirit a most grateful rebound, and filled all his small soul with a deep sense of relief. But he kept prudently still, and ventured no comment. There was a voiceless interval of some duration now, in which no sounds were heard but the beating of the rain upon the panes, the sighing and complaining of the winds, and now and then a muffled sob from Roxana. The sobs became more and more infrequent, and at last ceased. Then the refugee began to talk again. "Shet down dat light a little. More yit. Person dat is hunted don't like the light. Dar, that'll do. I can see where you is, and that's enough. I's gwine to tell you the tale, and cut it just as short as I can, and then I'll tell you what you's got to do. Dat man that bought me ain't a bad man. He's good enough as planters go, and if he could 'a' had his way I'd 'a' been a house servant in his family and been comfortable. But his wife was a Yank, and not right down good looking, and she rise up agin me straight off. So den they sent me out to the quarters amongst the common field hands. Dat woman warn't satisfied even with dat, but she worked up the overseer agin me. She is dat jealous and hateful. So the overseer he had me out before day in the mornings, and worked me the whole long day as long as there's any light to see by, and many's the lashings I got, 'cause I couldn't come up to the work of the strongest. Dat overseer was a Yank, too, out in New England, and anybody down south can tell you what dat mean. Dey knows how to work a nigger to death, and dey knows how to whale 'em, too. Whale 'em till dey's backs is welted like a washboard. Long at first my master said a good word for me to the overseer, but dat is bad for me, for the mistis she find it out, and arter dat I just ketched it at every turn. They warn't no mercy for me no more." Tom's heart was fired with fury against the planter's wife, and he said to himself, "But for that meddlesome fool everything would have gone all right." He added a deep and bitter curse against her. The expression of this sentiment was fiercely written in his face, and stood thus revealed to Roxana by a white glare of lightning which turned the somber dusk of the room into dazzling day at that moment. She was pleased and grateful, for did not that expression show that her child was capable of grieving for his mother's wrongs, and of feeling resentment toward her persecutors, a thing which she had been doubting? But her flash of happiness was only a flash, and went out again and left her spirit dark, for she said to herself, "He sold me down de river. He can't feel for a body long. This'll pass and go." Then she took up her tale again. "'Bout 10 days ago I's saying to myself that I couldn't last many more weeks. I's so wore out with the awful work under the lashings, and so downhearted and mis'able. And I didn't care no more, nuther. Life warn't worth nothing to me, if I had to go on like dat. Well, when a body is in a frame of mind like dat, what do a body care what a body do? Dey was a little sickly nigger wench about 10-year-old that's good to me, and hadn't no mammy, poor thing. And I loved her, and she loved me, and she come out while I was working, and she had a roasted tater, and tried to slip it to me, robbing herself, you see, 'cause she knowed the overseer didn't give me enough to eat. And he ketched her at it, and give her a lick across the back with his stick, which is as thick as a broom handle, and she drop, screaming on the ground, and squirming and walling around in the dust like a spider that's got crippled. I couldn't stand it. All the hell-fire that's ever in my heart flame up, and I snatched the stick out in his hand and laid him flat. He laid the moaning and cussing and all out of his head, and the niggers is plumb scared to death. They gathered round him to help him, and I jumped on his hoss and took out for the river as tight as I could go. I knowed what they would do with me. Soon as he got well, he would start in and work me to death if Massa let him, and if they didn't do that, they'd sell me furder down the river, and that's the same thing, so I 'lowed to drown myself and get out of my troubles. It is getting toward dark. I was at the river in 2 minutes. Then I see a canoe, and I says, "Dey ain't no use to drown myself till I got to." So I ties the hoss in the edge of the timber and shove out down the river, keeping in under the shelter of the bluff bank and praying for the dark to shet down quick. I had a powerful good start, 'cause the big house is 3 mile back from the river, and only the work mule to ride down, and only the niggers ride 'em, and they warn't gwine to hurry. They'd give me all the chance they could. Before a body could go to the house and back it would be long past dark, and they couldn't track the horse and find out which way I went till morning, and the niggers would tell 'em all the lies they could 'bout it. Well, the dark come, and I went on a spinning down the river. I paddled more'n 2 hours. Then I warn't worried no more, so I quit paddling and floated down the current, considering what I was gwine to do if I didn't have to drown myself. I made up some plans and floated along, turning 'em over in my mind. Well, when it was a little past midnight, as I reckoned, and I'd come 15 or 20 mile, I see the lights of a steamboat laying at the bank. Why, they warn't no town and no wood yard, and pretty soon I ketched the shape of the chimbley tops agin the stars, and then, good gracious me, I most jumped out of my skin for joy. It is the Grand Mogul. I was chambermaid on her for 8 seasons in the Cincinnati and Orleans trade. I slid long past, don't see nobody stirring nowhere. Hear 'em hammering away in the engine room. Then I knowed what the matter was. Some of the machinery's broke. I got ashore below the boat and turned the canoe loose. Then I goes along up, and dey is just one plank out. I stepped aboard the boat. It is powerful hot. Deckhands and roustabouts is sprawled around asleep on the forecastle. The second mate, Jim Bangs, he sot down to bits with his head down asleep, 'cause that's the way the second mate stand the captain's watch. And the old watchman, Billy Hatch, he is a-nodding on the companionway, and I knowed 'em all. And land, but they did look good. I says to myself, I wished old master'd come along now and try to take me, bless your heart. I's among friends, I is. So I tromped right along amongst 'em, and went up on the biler deck, and way back aft to the ladies' cabin guard, and sot down dah in the same cheer that's I'd sot in most 100 million times, I reckon. And it is just home again, I tell you. In 'bout an hour I heard the ready bell jingle, and then the racket begin. Pretty soon I heard the gong strike. "Set her back on the outside," I says to myself. "I reckon I knows that music." I heard the gong again. "Come ahead on the inside," I says. Gong again. "Stop the outside." Gong again. "Come ahead on the outside." Now's we pinted for St. Louis, and I's outer the woods, and ain't got to drown myself at all. I knowed the Mogul is in the St. Louis trade now, you see, and it is just fair daylight when we passed our plantation, and I seen the gang of niggers and white folks hunting up and down the shore and troubling theyselves a good deal about me, but I warn't troubling myself none about them. 'Bout that time Sally Jackson, that used to be my second chambermaid and is head chambermaid now, she come out on the guard, and is powerful glad to see me, and so is all the officers, and I told 'em I'd got kidnapped and sold down the river, and they made up $20 and give it to me. And Sally, she rigged me out with good clothes, and when I got here I went straight to where you used to was, and then I come to this house, and they say you's away but 'spected back every day. So I didn't dast go down the river to Dawson's, 'cause I might miss you. Well, last Monday I was passing by one of them places in 4th Street where they sticks up runaway nigger bills and helps to catch 'em, and I seed my marster. I most flopped down on the ground, I felt so gone. He had his back to me, and is talking to a man and giving him some bills, nigger bills, I reckon, and I's de nigger. He's offering a reward. That's it. Ain't I right? Don't you reckon?" Tom had been gradually sinking into a state of ghastly terror, and he said to himself now, "I'm lost, no matter what turn things take. This man has said to me that he thinks there was something suspicious about that sale. He said he had a letter from a passenger on the Grand Mogul saying that Roxy came here on that boat, and that everybody on board knew all about the case. So he says that her coming here instead of flying to a free state looks bad for me, and that if I don't find her for him, and that pretty soon, he will make trouble for me. I never believed that story. I couldn't believe she would be so dead to all motherly instincts as to come here, knowing the risk she would run of getting me into irremediable trouble. And after all, here she is, and I stupidly swore I would help find her, thinking it was a perfectly safe thing to promise. If I venture to deliver her up, but how can I help myself? I've got to do that or pay the money, and where's the money to come from? Well, I should think that if he would swear to treat her kindly hereafter, and she says herself that he is a good man, and if he would swear to never allow her to be overworked, or ill-fed, or— A flash of lightning exposed Tom's pallid face, drawn and rigid with these worrying thoughts. Roxana spoke up sharply now, and there was apprehension in her voice. "Turn up that light. I want to see your face better. There, now, let me look at you. Chambers, you's as white as your shirt. Has you see that man? Has he been to see you?" "Yes." "When?" "Monday noon." "Monday noon? Was he on my track?" Well, he thought he was. That is, he hoped he was. This is the bill you saw." He took it out of his pocket. "Read it to me." She was panting with excitement, and there was a dusky glow in her eyes that Tom could not translate with certainty, but there seemed to be something threatening about it. The handbill had the usual rude woodcut of a turbaned negro woman running, with the customary bundle on a stick over her shoulder, and the heading in the bold type, $100 reward. Tom read the bill aloud, at least the part that described Roxana, and named the master and his St. Louis address and the address of the Fourth Street agency, but he left out the item that applicants for the reward might also apply to Mr. Thomas Driscoll. "Gimme the bill." Tom had folded it and was putting it in his pocket. He felt a chilly streak creeping down his back, but said as carelessly as he could, "The bill? Why, it isn't any use to you. You can't read it. What do you want with it?" "Gimme the bill." Tom gave it to her, but with a reluctance which he could not entirely disguise. "Did you read it all to me?" "Certainly I did." "Hold up your hand and swear to it." Tom did it. Roxana put the bill carefully away in her pocket, with her eyes fixed upon Tom's face all the while. Then she said, "Yo's lying." "What would I want to lie about it for?" "I don't know, but you is. That's my opinion, anyways. But never mind about that. When I seed that man, I's that skeered that I could scarcely wobble home. Then I give a nigger man $1 for these clothes, and I ain't been in a house since, night ner day, till now. I blackened my face and laid hid in the cellar of a old house that burned down daytimes, and robbed a sugar hogshead and grain sacks on the wharf nights, to get something to eat. Never dast to try to buy nothing, and I's most starved. I never dast to come near dis place till dis rainy night, when dey ain't no people round scarcely. But to-night I've been a-standing in a dark alley ever since night come, waiting for you to come by, and here I is." She fell to thinking. Presently she said, "You seed dat man at noon last Monday?" "Yes." "I seed him the middle of dat afternoon. He hunted you up, didn't he?" "Yes." "Did he give you the bill dat time?" "No, he hadn't got it printed yet." Roxana darted a suspicious glance at him. "Did you help him fix up the bill?" Tom cursed himself for making that stupid blunder, and tried to rectify it by saying he remembered now that it was at noon Monday that the man gave him the bill. Roxana said, "You's lying again, sure." Then she straightened up and raised her finger. "Now den, I's gwine to ask you a question, and I wants to know how you's gwine to git around it. You knowed he is arter me, and if you run off 'stid of staying here to help him, he'd know there's something wrong about this business, and then he would inquire about you, and that would take him to your uncle, and your uncle would read the bill and see that you've been selling a free nigger down the river, and you know him, I reckon. He'd tar up the will and kick you out in the house. Now then, you answer me this question. Hain't you told that man that I would be sure to come here, and then you would fix it so he could set a trap and catch me?" Tom recognized that neither lies nor arguments could help him any longer. He was in a vise, with the screw turned on, and out of it there was no budging. His face began to take on an ugly look, and presently he said, with a snarl, "Well, what could I do? You see yourself that I was in his grip and couldn't get out." Roxy scorched him with a scornful gaze awhile, then she said, "What could you do? You could be Judas to your own mother to save your worthless hide. Would anybody believe it? No, a dog couldn't. You was the low-downest, orneriest hound that was ever pupped into this world, and I's responsible for it," and she spat on him. He made no effort to resent it. Roxy reflected a moment. Then she said, "Now, I'll tell you what you's gwine to do. You's gwine to give that man the money that you's got laid up, and make him wait till you can go to judge and get the rest and buy me free again." "Thunder, what are you thinking of? Go and ask him for $300 and odd? What would I tell him I wanted for, pray?" Roxy's answer was delivered in a serene and level voice. "You'll tell him you's sold me to pay your gambling debts, and that you lied to me and was a villain, and that I requires you to get that money and buy me back again." "Why, you've gone stark mad. He would tear the will to shreds in a minute. Don't you know that?" "Yes, I does." "Then you don't believe I'm idiot enough to go to him, do you?" "I don't believe nothing about it. I knows you's a-going. I knows it 'cause you knows that if you don't raise that money I'll go to him myself, and then he'll sell you down the river, and you can see how you like it." Tom rose, trembling and excited, and there was an evil light in his eye. He strode to the door and said he must go out of this suffocating place for a moment and clear his brain in the fresh air so he could determine what to do. The door wouldn't open. Roxy smiled grimly and said, "I's got the key, honey. Set down. You needn't clear up your brain none to find out what you're going to do. I knows what you's going to do." Tom sat down and began to pass his hands through his hair with a helpless and desperate air. Roxy said, "Is that man in this house?" Tom glanced up with a surprised expression and asked, "What gave you such an idea?" "You done it. Gwine out to clear your brain. And the first place, you ain't got none to clear. And in the second place, you ornery I told on you. You's the low-downest hound that ever, but I done told you dat before. Now den, this is Friday. You can fix it up with that man, and tell him you's gwine away to get the rest of the money, and that you'll be back with it next Tuesday or maybe Wednesday. You understand?" Tom answered sullenly, "Yes." "And when you gets the new bill of sale that sells me to my own self, take and send it in the mail to Mr. Pudd'nhead Wilson, and write on the back that he's to keep it till I come. You understand?" "Yes." "That's all, then. Take your umbrella and put on your hat." "Why?" "'Cause you's gwine to see me home to the wharf. You see this knife? I's toted it around since the day I seed that man and bought these clothes in it. If he catch me, I's gwine to kill myself with it. Now start along, and go soft, and lead the way. And if you gives a sign in this house, or if anybody comes up to you in the street, I's gwine to jam it right into you. Chambers, does you believe when I says that?" "It's no use to bother me with that question. I know your word's good." "Yes, it's different from yourn. Shut the light on and move along. Here's the key." They were not followed. Tom trembled every time a late straggler brushed by them on the street, and half expected to feel the cold steel in his back. Roxy was right at his heels and always in reach. After tramping a mile, they reached a wide vacancy on the deserted wharfs, and in this dark and rainy desert they parted. As Tom trudged home, his mind was full of dreary thoughts and wild plans, but at last he said to himself wearily, "There is but the one way out. I must follow her plan. But with a variation. I will not ask for the money and ruin myself. I will rob the old skinflint. End of chapter 18. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain, Chapter 19, The Prophecy Realized. Few things are harder to put up with than the annoyance of a good example. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. It were not best that we should all think alike. It is difference of opinion that makes horse races. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. Dawson's Landing was comfortably finishing its season of dull repose and waiting patiently for the duel. Count Luigi was waiting too, but not patiently, rumor said. Sunday came, and Luigi insisted on having his challenge conveyed. Wilson carried it. Judge Driscoll declined to fight with an assassin, that is, he added significantly, in the field of honor. Elsewhere, of course, he would be ready. Wilson tried to convince him that if he had been present himself when Angelo told him about the homicide committed by Luigi, he would not have considered the act discreditable to Luigi, but the obstinate old man was not to be moved. Wilson went back to his principal and reported the failure of his mission. Luigi was incensed, and asked how it could be that the old gentleman, who was by no means dull-witted, held his trifling nephew's evidence in inferences to be of more value than Wilson's. But Wilson laughed and said, "That is quite simple. That is easily explicable. I am not his doll, his baby, his infatuation. His nature is. The judge and his late wife never had any children. The judge and his wife were past middle age when his treasure fell into their lap. One must make allowances for a parental instinct that has been starving for 25 or 30 years. It is famished, it is crazed with hunger by that time, and will be entirely satisfied with anything that comes handy. Its taste is atrophied. It can't tell mudcat from shad. A devil born to a young couple is measurably recognizable by them as a devil before long, but a devil adopted by an old couple is an angel to them, and remains so through thick and thin. Tom is this old man's angel. He is infatuated with him. Tom can persuade him into things which other people can't, not all things. I don't mean that, but a good many, particularly one class of things, the things that create or abolish personal partialities or prejudices in the old man's mind. The old man liked both of you. Tom conceived a hatred for you. That was enough. It turned the old man around at once. The oldest and strongest friendship must go to the ground when one of these late-adopted darlings throws a brick at it. "It's a curious philosophy," said Luigi. "It ain't philosophy at all, it's a fact, and there is something pathetic and beautiful about it, too. I think there is nothing more pathetic than to see one of these poor old childless couples taking a menagerie of yelping little worthless dogs to their hearts, and then adding some cursing and squawking parrots and a jackass-voiced macaw, and next a couple of hundred screeching songbirds, and presently some fetid guinea-pigs and rabbits and a howling colony of cats. It is all a groping and ignorant effort to construct out of base metal and brass filings, so to speak, something to take the place of that golden treasure denied them by nature, a child. But this is a digression. The unwritten law of this region requires you to kill Judge Driscoll on sight, and he and the community will expect that attention at your hands, though, of course, your own death by his bullet will answer every purpose. Look out for him. Are you healed? That is, fixed?" "Yes. He shall have his opportunity. If he attacks me, I will respond." As Wilson was leaving, he said, "The judge is still a little used up by his campaign work and will not get out for a day or so, but when he does get out, you want to be on the alert." About 11 at night the twins went out for exercise and started on a long stroll in the veiled moonlight. Tom Driscoll had landed at Hackett's store 2 miles below Dawson's just about half an hour earlier, the only passenger for that lonely spot, and had walked up the shore road and entered Judge Driscoll's house without having encountered anyone either on the road or under the roof. He pulled down his window blinds and lighted his candle. He laid off his coat and hat and began his preparations. He unlocked his trunk and got his suit of girl's clothes out from under the male attire in it and laid it by. Then he blacked his face with burnt cork and put the cork in his pocket. His plan was to slip down to his uncle's private sitting-room below, pass into the bedroom, steal the safe key from the old gentleman's clothes, and then go back and rob the safe. He took up his candle to start. His courage and confidence were high, up to this point, but both began to waver a little now. Suppose he should make a noise, by some accident, and get caught, say, in the act of opening the safe. Perhaps it would be well to go armed. He took the Indian knife from its hiding-place and felt a pleasant return of his wandering courage. He slipped stealthily down the narrow stair, his hair rising and his pulses halting at the slightest creak. When he was halfway down, he was disturbed to perceive that the landing below was touched by a faint glow of light. What could that mean? Was his uncle still up? No, that was not likely. He must have left his night-taper there when he went to bed. Tom crept on down, pausing at every step to listen. He found the door standing open and glanced in. What he saw pleased him beyond measure. His uncle was asleep on the sofa. On a small table at the head of the sofa a lamp was burning low, and by it stood the old man's small cash-box, closed. Near the box was a pile of bank-notes and a piece of paper covered with figures in pencil. The safe door was not open. Evidently the sleeper had wearied himself with work upon his finances and was taking a rest. Tom set his candle on the stairs and began to make his way toward the pile of notes, stooping low as he went. When he was passing his uncle, the old man stirred in his sleep, and Tom stopped instantly, stopped and softly drew the knife from his sheath, with his heart thumping, and his eyes fastened upon his benefactor's face. After a moment or two he ventured forward again, one step, reached for his prize and seized it, dropping the knife-sheath. Then he felt the old man's strong grip upon him, and a wild cry of "Help! Help!" rang in his ear. Without hesitation he drove the knife home and was free. Some of the notes escaped from his left hand and fell in the blood on the floor. He dropped the knife and snatched them up and started to fly, transferred them to his left hand and seized the knife again, in his fright and confusion, but remembered himself and flung it from him, as being a dangerous witness to carry away with him. He jumped for the stair-foot and closed the door behind him, and as he snatched his candle and fled upward, the stillness of the night was broken by the sound of urgent footsteps approaching the house. In another moment he was in his room, and the twins were standing aghast over the body of the murdered man. Tom put on his coat, buttoned his hat under it, threw on his suit of girl's clothes, dropped the veil, blew out his light, locked the room door by which he had just entered, taking the key, passed through his other door into the back hall, locked that door and kept the key, then worked his way along in the dark and descended the black stairs. He was not expecting to meet anybody, for all interest was centered in the other part of the house now. His calculation proved correct. By the time he was passing through the back yard, Mrs. Pratt, her servants, and a dozen half-dressed neighbors had joined the twins and the dead, and the Sessions were still arriving at the front door. As Tom, quaking as with a palsy, passed out at the gate, 3 women came flying from the house on the opposite side of the lane. They rushed by him and in at the gate, asking him what the trouble was there, but not waiting for an answer. Tom said to himself, "Those old maids waited to dress. They did the same thing the night Stephen's house burned down next door." In a few minutes he was in the haunted house. He lighted a candle and took off his girl clothes. There was blood on him all down his left side, and his right hand was red with the stains of the blood-soaked notes which he had crushed in it, but otherwise he was free from this sort of evidence. He cleansed his hand on the straw, and cleaned most of the smut from his face. Then he burned the male and female attire to ashes, scattered the ashes, and put on a disguise proper for a tramp. He blew out his light, went below, and was soon loafing down the river road with the intent to borrow and use one of Roxy's devices. He found a canoe and paddled downstream, setting the canoe adrift as dawn approached, and making his way by land to the next village, where he kept out of sight till a transient steamer came along, and then took passage for St. Louis. He was ill at ease. Dawson's Landing was behind him. Then he said to himself, "All the detectives on earth couldn't trace me now. There's not a vestige of a clue left in the world. That homicide will take its place with the permanent mysteries, and people won't get done trying to guess out the secret of it for 50 years. In St. Louis, next morning, he read this brief telegram in the papers, dated at Dawson's Landing: "Judge Driscoll, an old and respected citizen, was assassinated here about midnight by a profligate Italian nobleman or a barber on account of a quarrel growing out of the recent election. The assassin will probably be lynched." "One of the twins," soliloquized Tom. "How lucky! It is the knife that has done him this grace. We never know when fortune is trying to favor us. I actually cursed Pudd'nhead Wilson in my heart for putting it out of my power to sell that knife. I take it back now." Tom was now rich and independent. He arranged with the planter, and mailed to Wilson the new bill of sale which sold Roxana to herself. Then he telegraphed his Aunt Pratt: "Have seen the awful news in the papers, and am almost prostrated with grief. Shall start by packet to-day. Try to bear up till I come." When Wilson reached the house of mourning, and had gathered such details as Mrs. Pratt and the rest of the crowd could tell him, he took command as mayor, and gave orders that nothing should be touched, but everything left as it was until Justice Robinson should arrive and take the proper measures as coroner. He cleared everybody out of the room but the twins and himself. The sheriff soon arrived and took the twins away to jail. Wilson told them to keep heart, and promised to do his best in their defense when the case should come to trial. Justice Robinson came presently, and with him Constable Blake. They examined the room thoroughly. They found the knife and the sheath. Wilson noticed that there were fingerprints on the knife's handle. That pleased him, for the twins had required the earliest comers to make a scrutiny of their hands and clothes, and neither these people nor Wilson himself had found any bloodstains upon them. Could there be a possibility that the twins had spoken the truth when they had said they found the man dead when they ran into the house in answer to the cry for help? He thought of that mysterious girl at once, but this was not the sort of work for a girl to be engaged in. No matter, Tom Driscoll's room must be examined. After the coroner's jury had viewed the body and its surroundings, Wilson suggested a search upstairs, and he went along. The jury forced an entrance to Tom's room, but found nothing, of course. The coroner's jury found that the homicide was committed by Luigi, and that Angelo was accessory to it. The town was bitter against the misfortunes, and for the first few days after the murder they were in constant danger of being lynched. The grand jury presently indicted Luigi for murder in the first degree, and Angelo as accessory before the fact. The twins were transferred from the city jail to the county prison to await trial. Wilson examined the finger marks on the knife handle and said to himself, "Neither of the twins made those marks." Then manifestly there was another person concerned, either in his own interest or as hired assassin. But who could it be? That he must try to find out. The safe was not opened, the cash box was closed, and had $3,000 in it. Then robbery was not the motive, and revenge was. Where had the murdered man an enemy except Luigi? There was but that one person in the world with a deep grudge against him. The mysterious girl. The girl was a great trial to Wilson. If the motive had been robbery, the girl might answer, but there wasn't any girl that would want to take this old man's life for revenge. He had no quarrels with girls. He was a gentleman. Wilson had perfect tracings of the finger marks of the knife handle, and among his glass records he had a great array of fingerprints of women and girls, collected during the last 15 or 18 years, but he scanned them in vain. They successfully withstood every test. Among them were no duplicates of the prints on the knife. The presence of the knife on the stage of the murder was a worrying circumstance for Wilson. A week previously he had as good as admitted to himself that he believed Luigi had possessed such a knife, and that he still possessed it notwithstanding his pretense that it had been stolen. And now here was the knife, and with it the twins. Half the town had said the twins were humbugging when they claimed they had lost their knife, and now these people were joyful and said, "I told you so." If their fingerprints had been on the handle, but useless to bother any further about that, the fingerprints on the handle were not theirs. That he knew perfectly. Wilson refused to suspect Tom. For first, Tom couldn't murder anybody. He hadn't character enough. Secondly, if he could murder a person, he wouldn't select his doting benefactor and nearest relative. Thirdly, self-interest was in the way. For while the uncle lived, Tom was sure of a free support and a chance to get the destroyed will revived again. But with the uncle gone, that chance was gone too. It was true the will had really been revived, as was now discovered, but Tom could not have been aware of it, or he would have spoken of it, in his native, talky, unsecretive way. Finally, Tom was in St. Louis when the murder was done, and got the news out of the morning journals, as was shown by his telegram to his aunt.
These speculations were unemphasized sensations rather than articulated thoughts, for Wilson would have laughed at the idea of seriously connecting Tom with the murder. Wilson regarded the case of the twins as desperate, in fact, about hopeless, for he argued that if a Confederate was not found, an enlightened Missouri jury would hang them, sure. If a Confederate was found, that would not improve the matter, but simply furnish one more person for the sheriff to hang. Nothing could save the twins but the discovery of a person who did the murder on his sole personal account, an undertaking which had all the aspect of the impossible. Still, the person who made the fingerprints must be sought. The twins might have no case with them, but they certainly would have none without him. So Wilson mooned around, thinking, guessing, day and night, and arriving nowhere. Whenever he ran across a girl or a woman he was not acquainted with, he got her fingerprints, on one pretext or another, and they always cost him a sigh when he got home, for they never tallied with the finger marks on the knife handle. As to the mysterious girl, Tom swore he knew no such girl, and did not remember ever seeing a girl wearing a dress like the one described by Wilson. He admitted that he did not always lock his room, and that sometimes the servants forgot to lock the house doors. Still, in his opinion, the girl must have made but few visits, or she would have been discovered. When Wilson tried to connect her with the stealing raid, and thought she might have been the old woman's confederate, if not the very thief disguised as an old woman, Tom seemed stuck, and also much interested, and said he would keep a sharp eye out for this person or persons, although he was afraid that she or they would be too smart to venture again into a town where everybody would now be on the watch for a good while to come. Everybody was pitying Tom. He looked so quiet and sorrowful, and seemed to feel his great loss so deeply. He was playing a part, but it was not all a part. The picture of his alleged uncle, as he had last seen him, was before him in the dark pretty frequently, when he was away, and called again in his dreams when he was asleep. He wouldn't go into the room where the tragedy had happened. This charmed the doting Mrs. Pratt, who realized now, as she had never done before, she said, what a sensitive and delicate nature her darling had, and how he adored his poor uncle. End of chapter 19. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain. Chapter 20. The Murderer Chuckles. Even the clearest and most perfect circumstantial evidence is likely to be at fault, after all, and therefore ought to be received with great caution. Take the case of any pencil, sharpened by any woman. If you have witnesses, you will find she did it with a knife. But if you take simply the aspect of the pencil, you will say she did it with her teeth. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. The weeks dragged along, no friend visiting the jailed twins but their counsel and Aunt Patsy Cooper, and the day of trial came at last, the heaviest day in Wilson's life, for with all his tireless diligence he had discovered no sign or trace of the missing Confederate. Confederate was the term he had long ago privately accepted for that person, not as being unquestionably the right term, but as being the least possibly the right one, though he was never able to understand why the twins did not vanish and escape as the Confederate had done, instead of remaining by the murdered man and getting caught there. The courthouse was crowded, of course, and would remain so to the finish, for not only in the town itself but in the country for miles around the trial was one topic of conversation among the people. Mrs. Pratt, in deep mourning, and Tom, with a weed on his hat, had seats near Pembroke Howard, the public prosecutor, and back of them sat a great array of friends of the family. The twins had but one friend present to keep their counsel in countenance, their poor old sorrowing landlady. She sat near Wilson, and looked her friendliest. In the nigger corner sat Chambers, also Roxy, with good clothes on, and her bill of sale in her pocket. It was her most precious possession, and she never parted with it night or day. Tom had allowed her $35 a month ever since he came into his property, and had said that he and she ought to be grateful to the twins for making them rich, but had roused such a temper in her by this speech that he did not repeat the argument afterward. She said the old judge had treated her child 1,000 times better than he deserved, and had never done her an unkindness in his life. So she hated these outlandish devils for killing him, and shouldn't ever sleep satisfied till she saw them hanged for it. She was here to watch the trial now, and was going to lift up just one hurrah over it if the county judge put her in jail a year for it. She gave her turbaned head a toss and said, "When that verdict comes, I's going to lift the roof now, I tell you." Pembroke Howard briefly sketched the State's case. He said he would show by a chain of circumstantial evidence without break or fault in it anywhere that the principal prisoner at the bar committed the murder, that the motive was partly revenge and partly a desire to take his own life out of jeopardy, and that his brother, by his presence, was a consenting accessory to the crime, a crime which was the basest known to the calendar of human misdeeds, assassination, that it was conceived by the blackest of hearts and consummated by the cowardliest of hands, a crime which had broken a loving sister's heart, blighted the happiness of a young nephew who was as dear as a son, brought inconsolable grief to many friends, and sorrow and loss to the whole community. The utmost penalty of the outraged law could be exacted, and upon the accused, now present at the bar, that penalty would unquestionably be executed. He would reserve further remark until his closing speech. He was strongly moved, and so also was the whole house. Mrs. Pratt and several other women were weeping when he sat down, and many an eye that was full of hate was riveted upon the unhappy prisoners. Witness after witness was called by the State, and questioned at length, but the cross-questioning was brief. Wilson knew they could furnish nothing valuable for his side. People were sorry for Pudd'nhead Wilson. His budding career would get hurt by this trial. Several witnesses swore they heard Judge Driscoll say in his public speech that the twins would be able to find their lost knife again when they needed it to assassinate somebody with. This was not news, but now it was seen to have been sorrowfully prophetic, and a profound sensation quivered through the hushed courtroom when those dismal words were repeated. The public prosecutor rose and said that it was within his knowledge, through a conversation held with Judge Driscoll on the last day of his life, that counsel for the defense had brought him a challenge from the person charged at the bar with murder, that he had refused to fight with a confessed assassin, that is, on the field of honor, but had added significantly that he would be ready for him elsewhere. Presumably the person here charged with murder was warned that he must kill or be killed the first time he should meet Judge Driscoll. If counsel for the defense chose to let the statement stand so, he would not call him to the witness stand. Mr. Wilson said he would offer no denial. Murmurs in the house, "It is getting worse and worse for Wilson's case." Mrs. Pratt testified that she heard no outcry, and did not know what woke her up, unless it was the sound of rapid footsteps approaching the front door. She jumped up and ran out in the hall just as she was, and heard the footsteps flying up the front steps, and then following behind her as she ran to the sitting-room. There she found the accused standing over her murdered brother. Here she broke down and sobbed, sensation in the court. Resuming, she said the persons entered behind her were Mr. Rogers and Mr. Buckstone. Cross-examined by Wilson, she said the twins proclaimed their innocence, declared that they had been taking a walk and had hurried to the house in response to a cry for help which was so loud and strong that they had heard it at a considerable distance, that they begged her and the gentleman just mentioned to examine their hands and clothes, which was done, and no blood stains found. Confirmatory evidence followed from Rogers and Buckstone. The finding of the knife was verified, the advertisement minutely describing it and offering a reward for it was put in evidence, and its exact correspondence with that description proved. Then followed a few minor details, and the case for the State was closed. Wilson said that he had 3 witnesses, the Misses Clarkson, who would testify that they met a veiled young woman leaving Judge Driscoll's premises by the back gate a few minutes after the cries for help were heard, and that their evidence, taken with certain circumstantial evidence which he would call the court's attention to, would in his opinion convince the court that there was still one person concerned in this crime who had not yet been found, and also that a stay of proceedings ought to be granted in justice to his clients until that person should be discovered. As it was late, he would ask leave to defer the examination of his 3 witnesses until the next morning. The crowd poured out of the place and went flocking away in excited groups and couples, taking the events of the session over with vivacity and consuming interest, and everybody seemed to have had a satisfactory and enjoyable day, except the accused, their counsel, and their old lady friend. There was no cheer among these, and no substantial hope. In parting with the twins, Aunt Patsy did attempt a good-bye with a gay pretense of hope and cheer in it, but broke down without finishing. Absolutely secure as Tom considered himself to be, the opening solemnities of the trial had nevertheless oppressed him with a vague uneasiness, his being nature sensitive to even the smallest alarms. But from the moment that the poverty and weakness of Wilson's case lay exposed to the court, he was comfortable once more, even jubilant. He left the courtroom sarcastically sorry for Wilson. "The Clarksons met an unknown woman in the back lane," he said to himself. "That is his case. I'll give him a century to find her in, a couple of them if he likes. A woman who doesn't exist any longer, and the clothes that gave her her sex burnt up and the ashes thrown away. Oh, certainly I'll find her easy enough." This reflection set him to admiring for the 100th time the shrewd ingenuities by which he had insured himself against detection, more, against even suspicion. Nearly always in cases like this there is some little detail or other overlooked, some wee little track or trace left behind, and detection follows. But here there's not even the faintest suggestion of a trace left. No more than a bird leaves when it flies through the air, yes, through the night, you may say. The man that can track a bird through the air in the dark and find that bird is the man to track me out and find the judge's assassin. No other need apply. And that is the job that has been laid out for poor Pudd'nhead Wilson, of all people in the world. Lord, it will be pathetically funny to see him grubbing and groping after that woman that don't exist, and the right person sitting under his very nose all the time. The more he thought the situation over, the more the humor of it struck him. Finally he said, "I'll never let him hear the last of that woman. Every time I catch him in company to his dying day I'll ask him, in the guileless, affectionate way that used to gravel him so when I inquired how his unborn law business was coming along, 'Got on her track yet, hey, Pudd'nhead?'" He wanted to laugh, but that would not have answered. There were people about, and he was mourning for his uncle. He made up his mind that it would be good entertainment to look in on Wilson that night and watch him worry over his barren law case and goad him with an exasperating word or two of sympathy and commiseration now and then. Wilson wanted no supper. He had no appetite. He got out all the fingerprints of girls and women in his collection of records and pored gloomily over them an hour or more, trying to convince himself that that troublesome girl's marks were there somewhere and had been overlooked. But it was not so. He drew back his chair, clasped his hands over his head, and gave himself up to dull and arid musings. Tom Driscoll dropped in an hour after dark and said with a pleasant laugh as he took a seat, "Hello, we've gone back to the amusement of our days of neglect and obscurity for consolation, have we?" And he took up one of the glass strips and held it against the light to inspect it. "Come, cheer up, old man. There's no use in losing your grip and going back to this child's play merely because this big sun-spot is drifting across your shining new desk. It'll pass, and you'll be all right again." And he laid the glass down. "Did you think you could win always?" "Oh, no," said Wilson with a sigh. "I didn't expect that, but I can't believe Luigi killed your uncle, and I feel very sorry for him. It makes me blue. And you would feel as I do, Tom, if you were not prejudiced against those young fellows." "I don't know about that," and Tom's countenance darkened, for his memory reverted to his kicking. "I owe them no good will, considering the brunette one's treatment of me that night. Prejudice or no prejudice, Pudd'nhead, I don't like them, and when they get their deserts you're not going to find me sitting on the mourner's bench." He took up another strip of glass and exclaimed, "Why, here's old Roxy's label. You going to ornament the royal palaces with nigger paw marks, too? By the date here, I was 7 months old when this was done, and she was nursing me and her little nigger cub. There's a line straight across her thumb print. How comes that?" And Tom held out the piece of glass to Wilson. "That is common," said the bored man wearily. "Scar of a cut or a scratch, usually." And he took the strip of glass indifferently and raised it toward the lamp. All the blood sank suddenly out of his face. His hand quaked, and he gazed at the polished surface before him with the glassy stare of a corpse. "Great heavens, what's the matter with you, Wilson? Are you going to faint?" Tom sprang for a glass of water and offered it, but Wilson shrank, shuddering from him, and said, "No, no, take it away." His breast was rising and falling, and he moved his head about in a dull and wandering way like a person who had been stunned. Presently he said, "I shall feel better when I get to bed. I have been overwrought today, yes, and overworked for many days." "Then I'll leave you and let you get to your rest. Good night, old man." But as Tom went out he couldn't deny himself a small parting jibe. "Don't take it so hard. A body can't win every time. You'll hang somebody yet." Wilson muttered to himself, "It is no lie to say I am sorry I have to begin with you, miserable dog that you are." He braced himself up with a glass of cold whiskey and went to work again. He did not compare the new finger marks unintentionally left by Tom a few minutes before on Roxy's glass with the tracings of the marks left on the knife handle, there being no need for that, for his trained eye, but busied himself with another matter, muttering from time to time, "Idiot that I was! Nothing but a girl would do me. A man in girl's clothes never occurred to me." First he hunted out the plate containing the fingerprints made by Tom when he was 12 years old, and laid it by itself. Then he brought forth the marks made by Tom's baby fingers when he was a suckling of 7 months, and placed these 2 plates with the one containing this subject's newly and unconsciously made record. "Now the series is complete," he said with satisfaction, and sat down to inspect these things and enjoy them. But his enjoyment was brief. He stared a considerable time at the 3 strips and seemed stupefied with astonishment. At last he put them down and said, "I can't make it out at all. Hang it, the babies don't tally with the others." He walked the floor for half an hour puzzling over his enigma, then he hunted out the other glass plates. He sat down and puzzled over these things a good while, but kept muttering, "It's no use. I can't understand it. They don't tally right, and yet I'll swear the names and dates are right, and so of course they ought to tally. I never labeled one of these things carelessly in my life. There is a most extraordinary mystery here." He was tired out now, and his brains were beginning to clog. He said he would sleep himself fresh, and then see what he could do with this riddle. He slept through a troubled and unrestful hour, then unconsciousness began to shred away, and presently he rose drowsily to a sitting posture. "Now, what was that dream?" he said, trying to recall. "What was that dream? It seemed to unravel that and he landed in the middle of the floor at a bound, without finishing the sentence, and ran and turned up his light and seized his records. He took a single swift glance at them and cried out, "It's so! Heavens, what a revelation! And for 23 years no man has ever suspected it." End of chapter 20. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain, Chapter 21, Doom. He is useless on top of the ground. He ought to be under it, inspiring the cabbages. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. April 1. This is the day upon which we are reminded of what we are on the other 364. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. Wilson put on enough clothes for business purposes, and went to work under a high pressure of steam. He was awake all over. All sense of weariness had been swept away by the invigorating refreshment of the great and hopeful discovery which he had made. He made fine and accurate reproductions of a number of his records, and then enlarged them on a scale of 10-to-1 with his pantograph. He did these pantograph enlargements on sheets of white cardboard, and made each individual line of the bewildering maze of whorls and curves or loops which consisted of the pattern of a record stand out bold and black by reinforcing it with ink. To the untrained eye the collection of delicate originals made by the human finger on the glass plates looked about alike, but when enlarged 10 times they resembled the markings of a block of wood that has been sawed across the grain, and the dullest eye could detect at a glance, and at a distance of many feet, that no 2 of the patterns were alike. When Wilson had at last finished his tedious and difficult work, he arranged his results according to a plan in which a progressive order and sequence was a principal feature. Then he added to the batch several pantograph enlargements which he had made from time to time in bygone years. The night was spent, and the day well advanced now. By the time he had snatched a trifle of breakfast it was 9 o'clock, and the court was ready to begin its sitting. He was in his place 12 minutes later with his records. Tom Driscoll caught a slight glimpse of the records and nudged his nearest friend and said with a wink, "Pudd'nhead's got a rare eye to business. Thinks that as long as he can't win his case, it's at least a noble good chance to advertise his window palace decorations without any expense." Wilson was informed that his witnesses had been delayed, but would arrive presently. But he rose and said he should probably not have occasion to make use of their testimony. An amused murmur ran through the room. "It's a clean back-down. He gives up without hitting a lick." Wilson continued, "I have other testimony, and better." This compelled interest, and evoked murmurs of surprise that had a delectable ingredient of disappointment in them. "If I seem to be springing this evidence upon the court, I offer as my justification for this that I did not discover its existence until late last night, and have been engaged in examining and classifying it ever since, until half an hour ago. I shall offer it presently, but first I wish to say a few preliminary words. May it please the court, the claim given the front place, the claim most persistently urged, the claim most strenuously, and I may even say aggressively and defiantly insisted upon by the prosecution, is this: that the person whose hand left the blood-stained fingerprints upon the handle of the Indian knife is the person who committed the murder." Wilson paused, during several moments, to give impressiveness to what he was about to say, and then added tranquilly, "We grant that claim." It was an electrical surprise. No one was prepared for such an admission. A buzz of astonishment rose on all sides, and people were heard to intimate that the overworked lawyer had lost his mind. Even the veteran judge, accustomed as he was to legal ambushes and masked batteries in criminal procedure, was not sure that his ears were not deceiving him, and asked counsel what it was he had said. Howard's impassive face betrayed no sign, but his attitude and bearing lost something of their careless confidence for a moment. Wilson resumed, "We not only grant that claim, but we welcome it and strongly endorse it. Leaving that matter for the present, we will now proceed to consider other points in the case which we propose to establish by evidence, and shall include that one in the chain in its proper place." He had made up his mind to try a few hardy guesses in mapping out his theory of the origin and motive of the murder, guesses designed to fill up gaps in it, guesses which could help if they hit, and would probably do no harm if they didn't. To my mind, certain circumstances of the case before the court seem to suggest a motive for the homicide quite different from the one insisted on by the State. It is my conviction that the motive was not revenge, but robbery. It has been urged that the presence of the accused brothers in that fatal room, just after notification that one of them must take the life of Judge Driscoll or lose his own the moment the parties should meet, clearly signifies that the natural instinct of self-preservation moved my clients to go there secretly and save Count Luigi by destroying his adversary. Then why did they stay there after the deed was done? Mrs. Pratt had time, although she did not hear the cry for help, but woke up some moments later, to run to that room, and there she found these men standing and making no effort to escape. If they were guilty, they ought to have been running out of the house at the same time that she was running to that room. If they had had such a strong instinct toward self-preservation as to move them to kill that unarmed man, what had become of it now, when it should have been more alert than ever? Would any of us have remained there? Let us not slander our intelligence to that degree. Much stress has been laid upon the fact that the accused offered a very large reward for the knife with which this murder was done, that no thief came forward to claim that extraordinary reward, that the latter fact was good circumstantial evidence that the claim that the knife had been stolen was a vanity and a fraud, that these details taken in connection with the memorable and apparently prophetic speech of the deceased concerning that knife, and the final discovery of that very knife in the fatal room where no living person was found present with the slaughtered man but the owner of the knife and his brother, form an indestructible chain of evidence which fixed the crime upon those unfortunate strangers. But I shall presently ask to be sworn, and shall testify that there was a large reward offered for the thief also, and it was offered secretly and not advertised, that this fact was indiscreetly mentioned, or at least tacitly admitted, in what was supposed to be safe circumstances, but may not have been. The thief may have been present himself. Tom Driscoll had been looking at the speaker, but dropped his eyes at this point. In that case, he would retain the knife in his possession, not daring to offer it for sale or for pledge in a pawnshop. There was a nodding of heads among the audience by way of admission that this was not a bad stroke. I shall prove to the satisfaction of the jury that there was a person in Judge Driscoll's room several minutes before the accused entered it. This produced a strong sensation. The last drowsy head in the courtroom roused up now, and made preparation to listen. If it shall seem necessary, I will prove by the Mrs. Clarkson that they met a veiled person, ostensibly a woman, coming out of the back gate a few minutes after the cry for help was heard. This person was not a woman, but a man dressed in woman's clothes. Another sensation. Wilson had his eye on Tom when he hazarded this guess, to see what effect it would produce. He was satisfied with the result, and said to himself, "It was a success. He's hit." The object of that person in that house was robbery, not murder. It is true that the safe was not open, but there was an ordinary cash-box on the table, with $3,000 in it. It is easily supposable that the thief was concealed in the house, that he knew of the box, and of its owner's habit of counting its contents and arranging his accounts at night, if he had that habit, which I do not assert, of course, that he tried to take the box while its owner slept, but made a noise and was seized, and had to use the knife to save himself from capture, and that he fled without his booty because he heard help coming. I have now done with my theory, and will proceed to the evidences by which I propose to try to prove its soundness. Wilson took up several of his strips of glass. When the audience recognized these familiar mementos of Pudd'nhead's old-time childish puttering and folly, the tense and funereal interest vanished out of their faces, and the house burst into volleys of relieving and refreshing laughter, and Tom chirked up and joined in the fun himself. But Wilson was apparently not disturbed. He arranged his records on the table before him, and said, "I beg the indulgence of the court while I make a few remarks in explanation of some evidence which I am about to introduce, and which I shall presently ask to be allowed to verify under oath on the witness-stand. Every human being carries with him from his cradle to his grave certain physical marks which do not change their character, and by which he can always be identified, and that without shade of doubt or question. These marks are his signature, his physiological autograph, so to speak, and this autograph cannot be counterfeited, nor can he disguise it or hide it away, nor can it become illegible by the wear and mutations of time. This signature is not his face. Age can change that beyond recognition. It is not his hair, for that can fall out. It is not his height, for duplicates of that exist. It is not his form, for duplicates of that exist also, whereas this signature is each man's very own. There is no duplicate of it among the swarming populations of the globe." The audience were interested once more. "This autograph consists of the delicate lines or corrugations with which nature marks the insides of the hands and the soles of the feet. If you will look at the balls of your fingers, you that have very sharp eyesight, you will observe that these dainty curving lines lie close together, like those that indicate the borders of oceans in maps, and that they form various clearly defined patterns, such as arches, circles, long curves, whorls, etc., and that these patterns differ on the different fingers. Every man in the room had his hand up to the light now, and his head canted to one side, and was minutely scrutinizing the balls of his fingers. There were whispered ejaculations of, "Why, it's so! I never noticed that before." "The patterns on the right hand are not the same as those on the left." Ejaculations of, "Why, that's so, too." "Taken finger for finger, your patterns differ from your neighbors." Comparisons were made all over the house. Even the judge and jury were absorbed in this curious work. "The patterns of a twin's right hand are not the same as those on his left. One twin's patterns are never the same as his fellow twin's patterns. The jury will find that the patterns upon the finger balls of the twins' hands follow this rule." An examination of the twins' hands was begun at once. "You have often heard of twins who were so exactly alike that when dressed alike their own parents could not tell them apart. Yet there was never a twin born into this world that did not carry from birth to death a sure identifier in this mysterious and marvelous natal autograph. That once known to you, his fellow twin could never personate him and deceive you." Wilson stopped and stood silent. Inattention dies a quick and sure death when a speaker does that. The stillness gives warning that something is coming. All palms and finger balls went down now, all slouching forms straightened, all heads came up, all eyes were fastened upon Wilson's face. He waited yet 1, 2, 3 moments to let his pause complete and perfect its spell upon the house. Then, when through the profound hush he could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, he put out his hand and took the Indian knife by the blade and held it aloft, where all could see the sinister spots upon its ivory handle. Then he said, in a level and passionless voice, "Upon this haft stands the assassin's natal autograph, written in the blood of that helpless and unoffending old man who loved you and whom you all loved. There is but one man in the whole earth whose hand can duplicate that crimson sign." He paused and raised his eyes to the pendulum swinging back and forth. "And, please God, we will produce that man in this room before the clock strikes noon." Stunned, distraught, unconscious of its own movement, the house half rose, as if expecting to see the murderer appear at the door, and a breeze of muttered ejaculations swept the place. "Order in the court! Sit down!" This from the sheriff. He was obeyed, and quiet reigned again. Wilson stole a glance at Tom and said to himself, "He is flying signals of distress now. Even people who despise him are pitying him. They think this is a hard ordeal for a young fellow who has lost his benefactor by so cruel a stroke, and they are right." He resumed his speech. "For more than 20 years I have amused my compulsory leisure with collecting these curious physical signatures in this town. At my house I have hundreds upon hundreds of them. Each and every one is labeled with name and date, not labeled the next day or even the next hour, but in the very minute that the impression was taken. When I go upon the witness stand, I will repeat under oath the things which I am now saying. I have the fingerprints of the court, the sheriff, and every member of the jury. There is hardly a person in this room, white or black, whose natal signature I cannot produce, and not one of them can so disguise himself that I cannot pick him out from a multitude of his fellow creatures and unerringly identify him by his hands. And if he and I should live to be 100, I could still do it." The interest of the audience was steadily deepening now. "I have studied some of these signatures so much that I know them as well as the bank cashier knows the autograph of his oldest customer. While I turn my back now, I beg that several persons will be so good as to pass their fingers through their hair and then press them upon one of the panes of the window near the jury, and that among them the accused may set their finger marks. Also, I beg that these experimenters or others will set their fingers upon another pane, and add again the marks of the accused, but not placing them in the same order or relation to the other signatures as before. for by one chance in a million a person might happen upon the right marks by pure guesswork once, therefore I wish to be tested twice." He turned his back, and the two panes were quickly covered with delicately lined oval spots, but visible only to such persons as could get a dark background for them, the foliage of a tree outside, for instance. Then upon call Wilson went to the window, made his examination, and said, "This is Count Luigi's right hand. This one, 3 signatures below, is his left. Here is Count Angelo's right. Down here is his left. Now for the other pane. Here and here are Count Luigi's. Here and here are his brothers." He faced about. "Am I right?" A deafening explosion of applause was the answer. The bench said, "This certainly approaches the miraculous." Wilson turned to the window again and remarked, pointing with his finger, "This is the signature of Mr. Justice Robinson." Applause. "This of Constable Blake." Applause. "This of John Mason, juryman." Applause. "This of the sheriff." Applause. "I cannot name the others, but I have them all at home, named and dated, and could identify them all by my fingerprint records." He moved to his place through a storm of applause, which the sheriff stopped, and also made the people sit down, for they were all standing and struggling to see, of course. Court, jury, sheriff, and everybody had been too absorbed in observing Wilson's performance to attend to the audience earlier. "Now then," said Wilson, "I have here the natal autographs of the 2 children, thrown up to 10 times the natural size by the pantograph, so that anyone who can see at all can tell the markings apart at a glance. We will call the children A and B. Here are A's finger marks taken at the age of 5 months. Here they are again, taken at 7 months." Tom started. "They are alike, you see. Here are B's at 5 months, and also at 7 months. They, too, exactly copy each other, but the patterns are quite different from A's, you observe. I shall refer to these again presently, but we will turn them face down now. Here, thrown up 10 sizes, are the natal autographs of the 2 persons who are here before you accused of murdering Judge Driscoll. I made these pantograph copies last night, and will so swear when I go upon the witness stand. I ask the jury to compare them with the finger marks of the accused upon the window panes, and tell the court if they are the same." He passed a powerful magnifying glass to the foreman. One juryman after another took the cardboard and the glass and made the comparison. Then the foreman said to the judge, "Your Honor, we are all agreed that they are identical." Wilson said to the foreman, "Please turn that cardboard face down and take this one, and compare it searchingly by the magnifier with the fatal signature upon the knife handle, and report your finding to the court." Again the jury made minute examinations, and again reported, "We find them to be exactly identical, Your Honor." Wilson turned toward the counsel for the prosecution, and there was a clearly recognizable note of warning in his voice when he said, "May it please the court, the State has claimed strenuously and persistently that the blood-stained fingerprints upon that knife handle were left there by the assassin of Judge Driscoll. You have heard us grant that claim and welcome it." He turned to the jury. "Compare the fingerprints of the accused with the fingerprints left by the assassin, and report." The comparison began. As it proceeded, all movement and all sound ceased, and the deep silence of an absorbed and waiting suspense settled upon the house. And when at last the words came, "They do not even resemble," a thunder crash of applause followed, and the house sprang to its feet, but was quickly repressed by official force and brought to order again. Tom was altering his position every few minutes now, but none of his changes brought repose nor any small trifle of comfort. When the house's attention was become fixed once more, Wilson said gravely, indicating the twins with a gesture, "These men are innocent. I have no further concern with them." Another outbreak of applause began, but was promptly checked. "We will now proceed to find the guilty." Tom's eyes were starting from their sockets. Yes, it was a cruel day for the bereaved youth, everybody thought. "We will return to the infant autographs of A and B.
I will ask the jury to take these large pantograph facsimiles of A's marked 5 months and 7 months. Do they tally?" The foreman responded, "Perfectly." "Now examine this pantograph taken at 8 months and also marked A. Does it tally with the other two?" The surprised response was, "No, they differ widely." "You are quite right. Now take these two pantographs of B's autograph, marked 5 months and 7 months. Do they tally with each other?" "Yes, perfectly." "Take this third pantograph marked B, 8 months. Does it tally with B's other two?" "By no means." "Do you know how to account for those strange discrepancies?" "I will tell you. For a purpose unknown to us, but probably a selfish one, somebody changed those children in the cradle." This produced a vast sensation, naturally. Roxana was astonished at this admirable guess, but not disturbed by it. To guess the exchange was one thing, to guess who did it quite another. Pudd'nhead Wilson could do wonderful things, no doubt, but he couldn't do impossible ones. Safe? She was perfectly safe. She smiled privately. "Between the ages of 7 months and 8 months, those children were changed in the cradle." He made one of this effect, collecting pauses, and added, "And the person who did it is in this house." Roxy's pulses stood still. The house was thrilled as if with an electric shock, and the people half rose as if to seek a glimpse of the person who had made that exchange. Tom was growing limp. The life seemed oozing out of him. Wilson resumed. "A was put into B's cradle in the nursery. B was transferred to the kitchen and became a negro and a slave." Sensation, confusion of angry ejaculations. "But within a quarter of an hour he will stand before you white and free." Burst of applause, checked by the officers. "From 7 months onward until now, A has still been a usurper, and in my finger record he bears B's name. Here is his pantograph at the age of 12. Compare it with the assassin's signature upon the knife-handle. Do they tally?" The foreman answered, "To the minutest detail." Wilson said solemnly, "The murderer of your friend and mine, York Driscoll, of the generous hand and the kindly spirit, sits in among you. Valet de chambre, negro and slave, falsely called Thomas à Becket Driscoll, make upon the window the fingerprints that will hang you." Tom turned his ashen face imploring toward the speaker, made some impotent movements with his white lips, then slid limp and lifeless to the floor. Wilson broke the awed silence with the words, "There is no need. He has confessed." Roxy flung herself upon her knees, covered her face with her hands, and out through her sobs the words struggled, "The Lord have mercy on me, poor miserable sinner that I is." The clock struck 12. The court rose. The new prisoner, handcuffed, was removed. End of chapter 21. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain. Conclusion. It is often the case that the man who can't tell a lie thinks he is the best judge of one. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. October 12, the Discovery. It was wonderful to find America, but it would have been more wonderful to miss it. Pudd'nhead Wilson's Calendar. The town sat up all night to discuss the amazing events of the day and swap guesses as to when Tom's trial would begin. Troop after troop of citizens came to serenade Wilson and require a speech, and shout themselves hoarse over every sentence that fell from his lips, for all his sentences were golden now, all were marvelous. His long fight against hard luck and prejudice was ended. He was a made man for good. And as each of these roaring gangs of enthusiasts marched away, some remorseful member of it was quite sure to raise his voice and say, And this is the man the likes of us have called a pudd'nhead for more than 20 years. He has resigned from that position, friends. Yes, but it isn't vacant. We're elected.
The twins were heroes of romance now, and with rehabilitated reputations, but they were weary of Western adventure, and straightway retired to Europe. Roxy's heart was broken. The young fellow upon whom she had inflicted 23 years of slavery continued the false heir's pension of $35 a month to her, but her hurts were too deep for money to heal. The spirit in her eye was quenched, her martial bearing departed with it, and the voice of her laughter ceased in the land. In her church and its affairs she found her only solace. The real heir suddenly found himself rich and free, but in a most embarrassing situation. He could neither read nor write, and his speech was the basest dialect of the Negro quarter. His gait, his attitudes, his gestures, his bearing, his laugh, all were vulgar and uncouth. His manners were the manners of a slave. Money and fine clothes could not mend these defects or cover them up. They only made them more glaring and the more pathetic. The poor fellow could not endure the terrors of the white man's parlor, and felt at home and at peace nowhere but in the kitchen. The family pew was a misery to him, yet he could never more enter into the solacing refuge of the nigger gallery that was closed to him for good and all. But we cannot follow his curious fate further. That would be a long story. The false heir made a full confession and was sentenced to imprisonment for life. But now a complication came up. The Percy Driscoll estate was in such a crippled shape when its owner died that it could pay only 60% of its great indebtedness, and was settled at that rate. But the creditors came forward now and complained that, inasmuch as through an error for which they were in no way to blame, the false heir was not inventoried at the time with the rest of the property, great wrong and loss had thereby been inflicted upon them. They rightly claimed that Tom was lawfully their property, and had been so for 8 years, that they had already lost sufficiently in being deprived of his services during that long period, and ought not to be required to add anything to that loss, that if he had been delivered up to them in the first place, they would have sold him, and he could not have murdered Judge Driscoll. Therefore, it was not that he had really committed the murder. The guilt lay with the erroneous inventory. Everybody saw that there was reason in this. Everybody granted that if Tom were white and free it would be unquestionably right to punish him. It would be no loss to anybody. But to shut up a valuable slave for life, that was quite another matter. As soon as the governor understood the case, he pardoned Tom at once, and the creditors sold him down the river. End of conclusion. The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain. Author's note to those extraordinary twins. A man who is not born with the novel-writing gift has a troublesome time of it when he tries to build a novel. I know this from experience. He has no clear idea of his story. In fact, he has no story. He merely has some people in his mind, and an incident or two, also a locality, and he trusts he can plunge those people into those incidents with interesting results. So he goes to work. To write a novel? No, that is a thought which comes later. In the beginning he is only proposing to tell a little tale, a very little tale, a 6-page tale. But as it is a tale which he is not acquainted with, and can only find out what it is by listening as it goes along telling itself, it is more than apt to go on and on and on till it spreads itself into a book. I know about this because it has happened to me so many times. And I have noticed another thing, that as the short tale grows into the long tale, the original intention, or motive, is apt to get abolished and find itself superseded by a quite different one. It was so in the case of a magazine sketch which I once started to write, a funny and fantastic sketch about a prince and a pauper. It presently assumed a grave cast of its own accord, and in that new shape spread itself out into a book. Much the same thing happened with Pudd'nhead Wilson. I had a sufficiently hard time with that tale because it changed itself from a farce to a tragedy while I was going along with it, a most embarrassing circumstance. But what was a great deal worse was that it was not one story but two stories tangled together, and they obstructed and interrupted each other at every turn and created no end of confusion and annoyance. I could not offer the book for publication, for I was afraid it would unseat the reader's reason. I did not know what was the matter with it, for I had not noticed as yet that it was two stories in one. It took me months to make that discovery. I carried the manuscript back and forth across the Atlantic 2 or 3 times, and read it, and studied over it on shipboard, and at last I saw where the difficulty lay. I had no further trouble. I pulled one of the stories out by the roots, and left the other, a kind of literary Caesarean operation. Would the reader care to know something about the story which I pulled out? He has been told many a time how the born and trained novelist works. Won't he let me round and complete his knowledge by telling him how the jackleg does it? Originally the story was called Those Extraordinary Twins. I meant to make it very short. I had seen a picture of a youthful Italian freak, or freaks, which were, on exhibition in our cities, a combination consisting of 2 heads and 4 arms joined to a single body and a single pair of legs, and I thought I would write an extravagantly fantastic little story with this freak of nature for hero, or heroes, a silly young miss for heroine, and 2 old ladies and 2 boys for the minor parts. I lavishly elaborated these people and their doings, of course, but the tale kept spreading along, and other people got to intruding themselves and taking up more and more room with their talk and their affairs. Among them came a stranger named Pudd'nhead Wilson, and a woman named Roxana, and presently the doings of these 2 pushed up into prominence a young fellow named Tom Driscoll, whose proper place was away in the obscure background. Before the book was half finished, those 3 were taking things almost entirely into their own hands, and working the whole tale as a private venture of their own, a tale which they had nothing at all to do with by rights. When the book was finished and I came to look around to see what had become of the team I had originally started out with, Aunt Patsy Cooper, Aunt Betsy Hale, and the 2 boys, and Rowena, the light-weight heroine, they were nowhere to be seen. They had disappeared from the story some time or other. I hunted about and found them stranded, idle, forgotten, and permanently useless. It was very awkward. It was awkward all around, but more particularly in the case of Rowena, because there was a love match on between her and one of the twins that constituted the freak, and I had worked it up to a blistering heat and thrown in a quite dramatic love quarrel, wherein Rowena scathingly denounced her betrothed for getting drunk, and scoffed at his explanation of how it had happened, and wouldn't listen to it, and had driven him from her in the usual "forever" way. And now here she sat crying and broken-hearted, for she had found that he had spoken only the truth, that it was not he but the other of the freak that had drunk the liquor that made him drunk, that her half was a prohibitionist and had never drunk a drop in his life, and altogether tight as a brick 3 days in the week, was wholly innocent of blame, and indeed, when sober, was constantly doing all he could to reform his brother, the other half, who never got any satisfaction out of drinking anyway, because liquor never affected him. Yes, here she was, stranded with that deep injustice of hers torturing her poor torn heart. I didn't know what to do with her. I was as sorry for her as anybody could be, but the campaign was over, the book was finished, she was sidetracked, and there was no possible way of crowding her in anywhere. I could not leave her there, of course. It would not do. After spreading her out so, and making such a to-do over her affairs, it would be absolutely necessary to account to the reader for her. I thought, and studied, but I arrived at nothing. I finally saw plainly that there was really no way but one. I must simply give her the grand bounce. It grieved me to do it, for after associating with her so much I had come to kind of like her after a fashion, notwithstanding she was such an ass, and said such stupid, irritating things, and was so nauseatingly sentimental. Still, it had to be done, so at the top of Chapter 17 I put a calendar remark concerning July the 4th, and began the chapter with this statistic: Rowena went out in the back yard after supper to see the fireworks, and fell down the well and got drowned. It seemed abrupt, but I thought maybe the reader wouldn't notice it, because I changed the subject right away to something else. Anyway, it loosened up Rowena from where she was stuck and got her out of the way, and that was the main thing. It seemed a prompt good way of weeding out people that had got stalled, and a plenty good enough way for those others, so I hunted up the two boys and said, "They went out back one night to stone the cat and fell down the well and got drowned." Next I searched around and found old Aunt Patsy and Aunt Betsy Hale where they were around, and said, "They went out back one night to visit the sick and fell down the well and got drowned." I was going to drown some others, but I gave up the idea, partly because I believed that if I kept that up it would arouse attention and perhaps sympathy with those people, and partly because it was not a large well and would not hold any more anyway. Still, the story was unsatisfactory. Here was a set of new characters who were become inordinately prominent, and who persisted in remaining so to the end, and back yonder was an older set who made a large noise and a great to-do for a little while, and then suddenly played out utterly and fell down the well. There was a radical defect somewhere, and I must search it out and cure it. The defect turned out to be the one already spoken of, 2 stories in one, a farce and a tragedy. So I pulled out the farce and left the tragedy. This left the original team in, but only as mere names, not as characters. Their prominence was wholly gone. They were not even worth drowning, so I removed that detail. Also I took the twins apart and made 2 separate men of them. They had no occasion to have foreign names now, but it was too much trouble to remove them all through, so I left them christened as they were, and made no explanation. The End of The Tragedy of Pudd'nhead Wilson, by Mark Twain.